Get out. Hey, 3, 1. Sorry, there was supposed to be a little intro graphic there, but that didn't work. Anyway, welcome to another Grain and Grape live brewing demo. This is Ben.
G'day.
Said hi.
Yeah, I jumped the gun a bit, but that's all good.
That's fine, you're doing well. My name's Joel. For those of you who don't know me, you may know me better as cameraman or the other guy. I spend most of the stream working behind the camera and the computer running things. But we're not here for me. We're here to watch this guy brew some beer. So what are you brewing today, Ben?
So we are doing Munich Helles, which is probably my favourite style of beer, but it's also, I think, a really good showcase of the Braumeister's kind of programmable capabilities, because we can really easily do multiple stepped mashes and all those crazy German things without really having to do much other than push a few buttons, and the machine does the work for us. So I think it's a really good kind of showcase of what these things can do. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenging beer to brew, but rewarding.
Can be.
Yeah.
Can be.
Yeah, sure. Just on a quick note, hope everyone is safe and well out there. You'll notice we're all masked up, things in Victoria.
Just so we can't get doxed.
Yeah, that's mostly why. But the other reason is because we are amidst some stage 4 restrictions here in Victoria, especially Melbourne at the moment, where we are recording from. So for those of you watching interstate or around the world, I mean, we're all facing our own challenges at the moment, but we're doing our bit to stay safe, and yeah, we hope everyone out there is doing well. Ben will be wearing a mask for the entirety of the demo, so just know that he is smiling under there. I think we're in a world now where
mouthing a whole bunch of swear words at you.
just quietly.
Yeah.
But I think we're in a world now where everyone's pretty used to seeing everyone wearing masks. So quickly, on a final note, chat. There's a chat function to the right of the screen. You will probably be aware of that. Yes, right, my other right. Feel free to pop in your questions as Ben brews. I will do my best to get onto them and relay them over to Ben. Probably won't be able to answer all of your questions, so if we don't get to yours, don't feel bad, we still love you. But you know, the good thing is that there is a community of brewers out there who are probably watching this as well, and hopefully they may chime in and answer the questions for you. So please, we like to foster a collaborative discussion. Just say hi, chat amongst yourselves.
Keep it civil.
Keep it simple. Please keep it civil. We are human beings.
I know things get a bit heated around the Helles discourse, but
yeah.
Make sure that
it's a controversial topic.
We're looking after each other.
So just be courteous, be kind, but let's have some fun. Okay. Yeah, I think that's enough for me. I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to leave you in this guy's very capable hands.
Yes.
Right.
So straight off the gate, I'm just going to quickly set up the. Just going to quickly switch on the program so that we can get the water heated to where we want it to be. What I'm also going to do, I've got some brewing salts here. So with Munich Helles, you want it to be fairly soft water. So I haven't gone too overboard with it, but just enough to get a bit of calcium in there to help the enzymes that are in the grains do their thing as the mash progresses. We will touch on that a little bit over the course of today, but we have sort of done a couple of brewing videos now where we've sort of really gone over the ins and outs of what's going on. So we're going to try to keep this a bit more specific to the style, just because there's lots to talk about. We will still, don't worry, we will still touch on the basics, but I will kind of be going into a little bit more detail as to why I'm doing certain things for this type of beer. But I'm just going to add a little bit of my water into my salts just to get them dissolved, and then I'll add them into the brewing water, and that will just help them to mix a little bit better. If I just put them in, you can just put them in as salts, But I just find by like dissolving them even just a little bit in some water, it just kind of helps them incorporate a little bit better, a little bit quicker. So I'll just quickly chuck them in. And now my water's good to go. So I've basically just done 2.5 grams each of calcium chloride and calcium sulfate. Chloride gives you richness and kind of malt expression, and sulfate gives you kind of sharpness and definition. Again, I don't want to go too crazy with the minerals for this beer, and I definitely don't want it to come across as harsh. Munich Helles should have a nice sort of soft, rounded feel to it, and the bitterness should be present but not too assertive. So keeping it fairly balanced with the mineral additions is going to help me achieve that. And now we just wait for the Braumeister to hit temperature, which it just did. It's almost as though I preheated the water. So we're good to go, guys. We're going to add our grains in, which is very exciting. And I just realised I've been running around like a headless chook this morning trying to get everything going, and I forgot to grab a paddle. So I'm just going to quickly grab a paddle from behind the big banner. And I'll give it a bit of a rinse off because it's been sitting in cleaner.
While Ben's doing that, I might just throw a question out to the community. Anyone out there brewing today? Brewing along with Ben? I know there was one customer who had purchased some ingredients with the intention of brewing, but we had to cancel that demo. So I hope that didn't cause too much inconvenience. But let us know, guys, in the chat. Let's hear from some people, or not. Do what you like. I'm not going to force you.
I'm going to use my fingers to rip the bag open, or tear it asunder, if you will. Which leaves, I just find it leaves a nice jagged, uneven hole, and makes the grains fall out in an awkward way. Yep.
Yeah. So we have our first question come through. JP Brewer is asking, what's the mash steps? I don't know if you want to go through that yet.
I definitely will be touching on them as we go. But while I'm adding this in, I will say that I'm putting the grain in at 35 degrees, which might be a bit surprising to a few of you. It's not a very kind of standard starting temperature, but there is method to my madness.
Yeah, always. For anyone interested, the recipe is in the comments section, the description just below the video. If you click on show all, you'll see the recipe. There's a link to the recipe pretty much near the top, so you can just open that. It's a PDF, it's a JPEG file. It's pretty simple. Just go through the ingredients, the steps, the hoppage, all that stuff.
The cool thing about Munich Helles is it's probably the most simple recipe that you'll ever come across as well. I mean, it can get complicated. Some people like to, I'll throw that over there out of shot. Some people like to add other things to add character, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I personally think that I get the Munich Helles that I like by more or less going 100% Pilsner malt and just simple, noble German hops. Hallertau in this case. I tend to alternate between Hallertau and Tettnang depending on my mood and depending on alpha acids and things like that. If one of them is going to help me achieve what I'm trying to achieve with a single 40-gram pack better than the other, then I'll go with that. But they're both amazing, gorgeous hops. And it's not a hop-driven beer, but there should be a little bit of hop character in there. So the hop you choose, I think, is important.
Do you think it's more about quality of ingredients than recipe in this case? Freshness?
100%. It's fresh. It's good quality ingredients, and technique is what makes a good Helles. And most German beers, I would say, that's the case. It's about, like most sort of classic German beers traditionally would be one type of malt, one type of hop. What makes them special is how those ingredients are treated and the freshness of those ingredients. So obviously we don't have too much control over the freshness of our hops and our malt and things like that. But we can definitely get our hands on some good quality Pilsner malt. I'm using the Weyermann Bohemian Pilsner in this one. Just because it's a little bit less modified than some of the other ones. And I like that because I can kind of kind of have a bit more control over how the end wort is.
And what, for those out there who may not be aware, what does under-modified mean when it comes to malts?
Yeah, so it basically means when they are malting the grain. So while we're doing this, I may as well sort of briefly touch on what malting is, and that will help to kind of clarify what I'm talking about. I am moving a bit fast as well. That's partly because it is a multi-step mash. I want to get through it. I don't want you guys sort of still sitting here at 5 o'clock this evening, which probably won't happen, but basically, in order to make the energy in grains available to yeast, the certain enzymes within the grain need to be unlocked and allowed to do their thing. Now, in order to do that, the grain has to be taken through a process called malting, where they effectively trick the grain into thinking it's time to sprout into grass. And that lets the grain unlock its own enzymes in order to achieve that. And then they kiln those grains before it goes too far, so that they're able to kind of lock in that process, have the enzymes unlocked, but not actually changing the grains or changing the starches. But it's not just starch conversion enzymes that are unlocked in that process. There's all sorts of different things. There's protein enzymes, there's enzymes which break down what am I trying to say? There's beta glucanase. There's all sorts of different enzymes that are unlocked during that process. And while that malting process is undergoing, those enzymes are breaking down those other things within the grains. So the further they take it before they kiln it, the more modified it is, or the more of those other things have been broken down by the grain's natural enzymes. So by using a less modified malt, you're getting a grain that's had less of its proteins degraded. It's got more of its sort of structure intact. And that gives you the capability of having a bit more say in how those processes develop within the sort of the beer that you're creating. It's still fairly well modified. It's a lot more modified than grains would have been 100 years ago. But it's those little things, I think, that kind of, in such a subtle beer, all those little things add up to kind of a pretty big contribution to the overall flavour of the beer. So that's kind of why I tend to go for that sort of malt. I do have one other type of malt in there, which is just a sigillated malt, and that's basically just for pH correction. Because we're only using one base malt, when you have like darker malts, crystal malts, things like that in a grist, they have an acidifying effect on the mash, so they'll bring the pH down. Ideally, you want a pH of around 5.3 for your beers. I actually shoot lower in my German beers, so I'm shooting for about 5.1, 5.2 for this beer, and it should hit pretty much bang on. I might even grab the pH meter out once we sort of hit the mash proper, as it were. I will put the lid on while this is happening as well, just to help it kind of chug along, get to the next temperature. But yeah, you want to hit a pH of around 5.3. Ideally, I'm shooting for lower in this one, just for the flavour reasons. And without those darker grains, those crystal malts, things like that in the grist, if you don't do something to kind of intervene in that process, what will end up happening is your mash will be too high pH, and a high mash pH can result in soapy, astringent, kind of unpleasant flavors in the beer. So we're trying to avoid that, and that's why I've added some acidified malt, which is a German base malt, which has been sprayed with lactic acid.
Okay, question, yes. Now, JP, who asked earlier what the mash steps were about, evidently he's brewing along and needs the mash steps to
I will tell you straight away then. So I've doughed in at 35 degrees. And I'm not holding it there. I'm just literally throwing the grain in there and letting it go to my first mash step, which is 52 degrees, which I will have for 10 minutes. I have 63 degrees for 30 minutes, 72 degrees for 20 minutes, and 78 degrees for 10 minutes. If I was brewing this at home, I would extend those times out. So I'd probably have maybe a half-hour rest at 52. And probably the two sacrification rests are probably about right, maybe half an hour each, and then the 10 minutes at 78. The reason why I've shortened them is so I can fit it all into a reasonably length demo. Otherwise, like I said, we'd be here all day. Not even all day, but probably longer than most people's attention span or significant others would allow them to sit there and watch a brewing demonstration. Because there's also the heating up times between steps that I'm sort of trying to take into account. So if I was kind of had a 90 to 120 minute mash, and then you add in the times in between, that's, you know, two and a half hours just of mashing before we hit the boil.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of shrunk it down. But again, I tend to find that works fine. I've done it a bunch of times at demos with different types of beer. I've done Pilsners, Helles, Viennas, Märzens, all those sorts of delicious European lagers. And I tend to use pretty much the same mashing regime for most of my lagers, and I find that it works fine.
And just for anyone out there who doesn't last the entire 3-hour length of this brewing demo, the demo will stay up online on YouTube, of course. You can come back and watch it, and our intention is to do an edit, a truncated version of these longer streams so that you can watch them in a short time frame.
Which, when I'm presenting, is a very useful thing to do, because but I mean, while we're sort of mashing now, like it probably is a good time to talk about what those temperatures are and why we're sort of honing in on those. So the 35-degree dough-in, which is kind of a little bit unusual. Some people refer to it as an acid rest. I don't really kind of buy into that. You'd have to, in order for it to do what it's claimed it does, you'd have to have it there for a very long time.
Isn't it?
Like talking hours to get that acidifying effect. At which point the lactobacillus, which is already on the grain, is probably going to have more of an impact on your pH than than the enzymes. But I like to do it because it's a good hydration step. So you're kind of letting the grains get wet and hydrated and everything before any kind of real enzymatic activity starts happening. So you can make sure it's all mixed in well. You can make sure that everything is sort of as you want it to be, so that once it hits those kind of power temperatures, we'll use as lack of a better word, everything is kind of good to go. I like
for all my beers, just mashing in at around that temperature. Just makes doughing in. You don't really get dough balls, and it's just as a general thing I do. Not that that's a standard practice or anything.
No, but I found when I was brewing Brew in a Bag, I would kind of have a very sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, dynamic mash. Mm-hmm. So I would throw the grains in at 35 degrees with the urn still on and heating up to my sort of main sacrification rest. and it would pass through all those other enzyme ranges on its way up there, and I'd just be stirring constantly. Part of that is that I'm a stirrer. I like to stir. And I knew that like stirring when you're in your sort of sugar mash is kind of, can be a little bit counterproductive in terms of holding on to heat. But when it's heating, you need to stir. So I felt like I was doing something. By the time I hit the sack rest, I'd been stirring for so long, my wrists were sore and I didn't want to stir anymore.
Yeah,
So
right, yeah.
it kind of worked out well. But the other benefit of that was that it was going through all those different stages. And I think the beta-glucanase range is around the 35 to 45 degree mark. I don't know exactly where, but that helps to break down the kind of gumminess of the grains and of the wort. So particularly when you're doing brew in a bag, and if you've got like a real particularly fine bag that you're using, that will help the sugary, delicious nectar run off a lot freer as well. So that was just like, even for like a British Pale Ale or an American IPA or things like that, I was still doing that 35 degree dough in and ramp up. Yeah. Because I was seeing better efficiency from it, and I was getting a really consistent and high quality of beer from doing that. So I just think it's a good, a cool thing to do. Sorry, were you saying there was a question as well?
Yeah, okay, so a few more questions if they're appropriate to answer at this point. What do we got here? Mick is asking, what's the sulfate to chloride ratio? For water. Typically, just chiming in my 2 cents, usually hovers around 7 in Melbourne, and that's, oh well, that's the starting
Anywhere
pH.
from 6 to 8, yeah. So I'll do the first part first. Yes, I've tried to keep it as balanced as I can. I don't want overboard sulfates to kind of really add harshness and sort of make it too sharp with the bitterness, because you do want a nice soft mouthfeel. Even though it should finish really dry, this style of beer, you don't want it to be dry and sharp.
Yeah, it's not like a Pilsner where you want to accentuate that hop bite.
Yeah, it's a really malt-driven beer, so you want it, but you still want it to be dry. Like the best way to think about most Bavarian beer, but Helles in particular, is that the correct way to drink it is by the litre. Particularly in a hot beer garden in Bavaria in the middle of summer.
That's doing it right.
So if you can't drink a litre of it and still be thirsty for a second litre, then you've gone wrong somewhere. It needs to be extremely drinkable, extremely dry, but still flavourful and soft. And that's what separates it from, say, like a Bitburger or like a German Pils, which is a lot sharper. And more pronounced bitterness. This is a lot softer, but still got that dryness to it. So I think you need a bit of sulfate to hit that dryness, but I wanted it to be relatively balanced. So it's 1-to-1 chloride to sulfate. In terms of parts per million, again, you want a slightly softer water profile. So I haven't gone overboard with the salt additions. I've sort of hit about 50 ppm of calcium, which is what they sort of recommend, the royal recommend as your kind of standard minimum calcium content in your water to sort of help with enzymes and all that stuff. But I've deliberately tried not to go over that. So again, because I want that softness, I want it's sort of, in terms of mouthfeel and malt character, you're kind of in Bohemian, like Czech Pils territory for that, but with a less pronounced and less kind of floral hop character. Yeah, is a good way to think of Helles.
Just to chime in, was going to suggest that if anyone ever gets the chance to try a commercial version of a Helles and compare it to a German Pils, usually around springtime, I find Steve orders in a whole bunch of Weihenstephaner. But when you do it side by side, you really get the what they're all about.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with that as well is it's Weinstefan being a Bavarian brewery. Bavarian Pilsners are different from Pilsners from other parts of Germany as well. Oh, yep, sorry. Yeah, so the Bavarian Pilsners tend to be a bit softer and sweeter than, say, like a Pilsner you might get in Dusseldorf, for example. So it is a good comparison to do because it's like probably the closest you're going to get to a Helles would be a Bavarian. Camera's doing things.
Yeah, we're back. Sorry, the camera is doing things. Apologies about that. Turn my mic on. Yeah, apologies, the camera just cut out, but we're back.
Do we have audio through that?
Yes.
Excellent. So the other question I think was about water pH, and the cool thing about that is that the pH of the water is verging on unimportant. Like it does come into play, but it's more the things that are in the water that are going to impacts the pH of your mash. So like there's different sort of buffering abilities of different compounds. So if your water's high in carbonate, then that's going to have a really strong buffering. I don't know the lingo because I'm not a chemist, but it's going to be pulling. Oh, excuse me. It's going to be pulling the water and the pH of the mash up. And that's going to be fighting against the things in your grains, which are going to be pulling it down. So when you're calculating how to adjust your pH for your mash, you need to really use a calculator. Unless you're like a fairly skilled chemist and you can do it with a pen and paper. Use a calculator. There's plenty of really good ones online. Brewing Water is a really popular one. I use Brewer's Friend's advanced water calculator. It says advanced, don't be scared by it. It just means it gives you more options to input, and that's actually useful. But depending on where you are, you should be able to get yourself a water quality report from your council. If you're in western suburbs of Melbourne, City West Water actually publishes the water quality report year by year by suburbs. So we're on Altona Water here, and I can go onto City West Water's website and pull up the exact sort of specs and mineral content of Altona's water supply, and then take those figures and input them into a calculator like Brewing Water. And that will calculate based on the grains that I'm using. So you put in how many grams, what color, type of grain, and it will give you a really accurate prediction of what your mash pH is going to be. And I've only ever been sort of a couple of points of a pH reading out from what Brewer's Friend has given me. So
yeah, you've done better than me. I don't know what I do. I can't seem to get it right, but. Yeah, maybe we'll.
It sounds like a fairly advanced thing to do, but I
just sort of get your head around it.
It's a pretty simple, and I mean, like, don't do it on your first brew, maybe, because there's the basic mechanics of making beer are going to be something that takes sort of maybe 4 or 5 brews to get sort of on lock, so that you're not thinking about them as much.
And water chemistry is one of those things that. Something to worry about down the line. Nail down a few of the more basic.
But a lot of people kind of treat it as though it's this crazy hard science that only the really advanced brewers do. And I think you really can incorporate it into your brewing fairly early on, and you'll see a massive improvement in your beers purely from the pH thing alone.
Yeah.
So hitting the mash pH right is going to make such a huge impact on the flavour and drinkability of your beers. I mean, obviously when you're doing a Munich Helles, there's nowhere to hide, so all those little things are going to have a really big impact. But even if you're doing, like, one thing that I notice quite a lot in really hoppy beers, the trend at the moment is to have fairly gentle malt present. So like usually like base malt, maybe a bit of carapils. People aren't using crystal and darker malts in the hoppy beers at the moment. And if you don't factor that into your mash pH, you get that soapiness that I was talking about. From having too high a mash pH, you get that sort of astringent soapiness that comes
wine
across.
makers would call it flabby.
Yeah,
Kind of
and it really does impact the flavour and the drinkability of that beer, and it can take what can be quite a lovely sort of hop flavour and aroma and bitterness and make it quite sort of unpleasant. So it definitely is something that I think most people, just with a little bit of a basic understanding of what they're doing, can kind of work into their routine and do a pretty good job of it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a topic for a demo down the line. Just
absolutely.
on that, I think that'd be a really good one to do. A few more questions. Have you got the time?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, the Braumeister is running now, so it's going to just do its thing until we hit the end of the mash.
Time.
I don't have to touch it unless it starts spurting out and the lid starts lifting up off the
Once it starts volcanoing, I'll let you know. So we got some questions about, let's see, where we start. I'll just read them both out. So one question is regarding the Braumeister low oxygen kit and whether that would be appropriate for this style, which yes, I'll say, but I'll leave that to Ben. And we've got a question about rainwater as well, but maybe we'll answer the Braumeister one first.
Yep, so the Lodo kit absolutely would be awesome for something like a Munich Helles, because again, being such a subtle beer, and that's not to mean it's flavourless, I just mean that there's less kind of stuff going on to pull your focus away, so that, the finer details really shine in a beer like this. A low dissolved oxygen brewing approach is where you're going to, a Munich Helles is where that sort of technique is really going to shine through. I've not actually done any low dissolved oxygen brewing, partly because if I make a beer using Lodo and it's the best Munich Helles that I've ever made, that means every time I brew a Munich Helles, I'm gonna have to go through all those steps to do Lodo, and it's I don't want to find out that I need to do that. I'm happy just kind of, at this point, I'm happy with where I'm at.
I've not done it myself, but it looks like a punish. There's
a lot to it. I mean, just using the Lodo kit on its own is probably a good way to knock out a fair bit of your dissolved oxygen anyway, though.
Just on its own, yep.
So I would, definitely, for Munich Helles, any of those, particularly Bavarian, but generally German beers, you're going to get the benefits of that. So yeah, really good question, and like I said, I'm just wimping out on it. One day I'll do it, and it'll, like I said, it'll be the best beer I've ever made, and I'll have to do it every time.
I feel like it's one of those things, maybe like decoction, that you have to do at least once, just to do it.
I want to do another decoction soon, actually. First time I ever did one, I made a Czech Pils, did a triple decoction mash. Everything went wrong on the day, but the beer was one of the best beers I've ever brewed to this day. So and it is fun. It's you're connecting yourself to a bit of history there. And again, this is a style of beer which would definitely be appropriate to do decoction mashing. And we will talk a bit about what decoction mashing is as well, but we will sort of finish answering these questions first.
Yeah, perhaps we'll answer the last one. Just turn my mic on. Regarding Rainer is asking about rainwater. He asked a question earlier about it as well. I think he's asking, is rainwater a good source for brewing liquor? Is it a good...
So rainwater, the thing about rainwater is when you capture it, it's pretty much devoid of all minerals. It's been evaporated and then redistilled in the air, condensed, and then... So in theory, it's completely devoid of everything, but as it's passing through the atmosphere, it picks up dust and dirt and all sorts of things on its way down. And then it hits your roof and picks up stuff from your roof and from your pipes and from your tank. So it can be hard to know exactly what's going on with the water before you start. One thing you can do is if you can find somewhere that will test your water for you. You could take in a sample of your tank water and get them to give you a rundown of what's in it, and you can then use that as your starting point for planning your brews. Particularly, I imagine if you've got like a concrete tank, there's probably minerals in the concrete which are going to like work their way into your water. There'd be kind of lots of sort of variables at play there.
It's
so
sort of hard to give a definitive answer, but
yeah, but I know some people have taken their water into like pool shops off season and gotten like a basic rundown from there.
Okay.
I don't know how much info they'll give you from a pool shop because they're probably testing for different things in pool water, but
yeah.
Matty's given the thumbs up, so he says it's a good option.
Okay,
so,
that's Matt. Matt off camera, one of the other rad staff members here. Yeah, he's done it apparently, so that's a +1.
So yeah, so that's what I'd be doing. If you're using rainwater, grab a sample, run it into your local pool shop. Probably now is a good, or maybe not with lockdown, but off season is when to do it, because when they're not busy, they're probably more inclined to just like send a staff member out back to do it for you. Whereas if it's middle of summer and everyone's getting their pool water tested, they might be less inclined to accommodate that sort of request.
Yeah. Okay, everyone, I think we're just going to take a short little break. I've got to give the camera a rest and do some battery stuff, so I'm going to do that. Won't be long. Bear with us and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. We are back.
We're back.
Hey everyone.
G'day.
I hope everyone can see us right now. Okay. Do you want to tackle some more questions that came through during the break?
Yeah, there were a few good ones in the chat. So one of them was asking about if you're having like separate mash and boil vessels, so like a mash tun and a kettle kind of setup. When the best time to add the salts would be. You're definitely going to want to have the salts present in your mash. So I was just waiting for the trolley to go down the ramp. You're definitely going to want to have the salts present in your mash because the calcium is going to really be helping the enzymes to maintain their kind of integrity. Especially if you're doing like the kind of standard 67-degree single infusion type mash. That's quite warm for beta amylase, so having some extra calcium sort of helps harden it and protect it from denaturing at those warmer temperatures, so you'll get kind of action from both enzymes, dual action enzyme activity, as they say in the dishwashing tablet commercials. Yeah. You'll get that kind of dual action enzyme activity for longer, having that calcium in the water. But a lot of people do also add salts to their sparge water or even to the kettle. So I think there's no hard and fast rule in terms of like a definitive answer to that question, because it is something that people have different approaches to. But one thing I will say is you definitely want to have some calcium in your mash tun. And what was the other one? That was the controversial one, wasn't it? The hot side aeration.
Yeah, this is going to raise some hackles. Let's have some fun. Hot side aeration, and so Mick is asking about how does hot side aeration differ from adding oxygen on purpose before you pitch your yeast?
Oh yeah.
And why is one good and one bad, I suppose, is reading between the lines.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Because, and I could get into some trouble like diving into it because people have some very strong opinions about all that kind of thing. Ultimately, oxygen in the fermenter is all about yeast growth. So the initial kind of the initial growth phase of the yeast sort of reproducing and building up numbers relies on oxygen. As long as oxygen is present in the wort, the yeast won't be producing alcohol, but they'll get through it pretty quickly as well. So you kind of oxygenating your wort before fermenting is a backup to make sure that you've got plenty of strong, healthy yeast working on your fermentation, working on your beer. If you do a big enough starter, you could probably get away without it, which I think some people actually have started doing with certain types of beer. I think with something like a Munich Helles, I want every insurance policy available to me to kind of make sure that I'm getting a good, solid, strong fermentation. In terms of hot side aeration, I mean, we were just talking about Lodo before. So for ages, I was kind of told and believed that hot side aeration was one of those homebrew myths that wasn't really something you needed to worry about too much. But now there's all this stuff coming out about Lodo brewing and how much it accentuates your malt flavour and things like that. So
I've changed my opinion on it too. Well, not definitively. It's just like one of those things that, but I'm less sceptical about it than I was.
Yeah, it's kind of it's opened up some questions and some what's the word I'm looking for? The orthodoxy has been challenged. The dogma has shifted.
Yeah, which happens a lot in home brewing, especially things that used to be set in stone get revealed to be untrue or things that were considered myths turn out to be perhaps having some legitimacy.
And I'm gonna like expose myself as like a fraud in terms of being like the German beer guy here. I don't know that much about Lodo brewing. I know the basic gist of how it happens.
Kinda.
But I'm not sure if part of Lodo brewing involves not oxygenating in the fermenter as well. I haven't sort of looked into it that far, or like less oxygen. So it's possible that that's the approach. Just do like a massive starter, really like pitch a huge pitch of strong, healthy, fresh yeast, and let it push its way through that way, rather than having that initial growth phase in the fermenter. So, which is possible because I have heard people talking about that as well. So that's probably as deep as I'm going to go into it. Because
you can really get into the weeds.
And I don't want to talk about something that I haven't fully researched.
Sure, yeah.
As a wise man once said, I can't remember the exact quote, but something like that.
A wise man said something wise once.
Wise man once said something wise, and I'm going to do the gist of that.
Yeah. You insert your own wise comment here.
Yeah.
Another question. Let's see, I haven't had time to pre-vet this one. Using a 3-vessel system with a plastic insulated mash tun, how do you achieve mash steps in a non-direct fire system?
It is more challenging, definitely. I guess the kind of standard approach is to start with a fairly thick mash and then add quantities of boiling water to move up to the kind of consecutive steps until you hit your kind of mash out. Depending on how many steps you're doing, you might end up with quite a sloppy, thin mash by the end of it. And also depending on your mash tun capacity, you may not be able to do a lot of steps.
Maybe limited
in
by
order
that,
to do
a lot
that.
of water, yeah.
One thing that you can definitely do with that setup, although it is a bit time consuming and fiddly, is a decoction. So traditionally, like throughout sort of Bavaria, Bohemia, those kind of kingdoms which don't exist anymore, decoction was the way that these mashes would have occurred. So these like multi-step mashes are mimicking the rests at which decoction mashing would have sort of...
That's right. So they have a historical base in what the type of equipment they had back in the day. They were limited. They didn't. Braumeisters didn't exist in the 1700s.
And for probably a good 5,000 or 6,000 years of brewing history, thermometers didn't exist either. So so the processes were kind of trial and error, and what worked was what was done. I don't know exactly when decoction mashing became a thing, which for the history nerd is probably a bit of a bad.
Would this discussion be part of the history discussion?
It wasn't going to be, no.
Okay,
So it might be something. And while we're in the mash, I guess talking about decoctions is probably not a bad thing. But yeah, so decoction mashing basically involves pulling a third of your mash out of your mash tun, putting it into your kettle, bringing it to the boil, and then adding it back in, and that will elevate the temperature of your mash to the next step. Now the third that you pull out is kind of counterintuitively the thicker third of your mash. So you want more of the grain and less of the liquid. So it does a couple of things, a couple of really cool things actually. So it does bump up your temperatures as it goes, but also the boiling process is going to create a whole heap of Maillard reactions, and you get a whole lot of malanoidins, which is a flavour and aroma compound. Best way to describe what a malanoidin is that a malanoidin is what makes toast taste like toast instead of bread. It's the brown, awesome stuff that comes onto food when we cook it, effectively. So, so that kind of, those Maillard reactions that are happening through the decoction process adds a heap of flavour and a heap of malt character to those beers as well. So particularly something like a Helles, where it is just a Pilsner malt, you get a lot more oomph out of it from doing that.
Yeah, caramel and toffee is probably another good example too, turning white sugar into toffee, basically. In that process, the caramelization you get is the Maillard.
Yeah. It is worth being aware as well that malanoidins aren't the same thing as caramelization. There's similarities, but there are differences as well. But yeah, absolutely. Like Maillard reactions are producing caramel, like
that's what you're talking about, which is.
So it's not like crystal malt flavour. It's like Munich malt flavour.
Toast.
Yeah, toast.
Toast.
And funnily enough, I mentioned before, a lot of people have a few different grains in their recipe. They don't just go the full Pilsner malt. A lot of people will put in a very small percentage of a type of malt called malanoidin malt, which is literally like a supercharged Munich malt, basically, for exactly that reason, to cheat their way into getting the flavour of a decoction mash without having to go through the fairly cumbersome steps involved. But if you're up for it, and if that's something you think you'd like to do, and I can definitely vouch for it being a super fun thing to do, definitely that would be an awesome way to knock out a German or European style beer with a bunch of different mash steps in it, with a sort of non-heated mash vessel. Speaking of mash steps, we should probably get onto the remaining steps because we've only covered the 35 degrees so far.
Yeah,
I'll breeze through it because there's not too much to talk about.
The questions have gone quiet for now, cool. So go for it.
So second rest was 52 degrees. That's my protein rest. There's two different temperature ranges you can do protein rests at. There's the low 50s and there's the high 50s. I've actually taken now to being more inclined to go in the high 50s. There's fairly complicated reasons behind that, and what I might even do is I won't go into too much detail because I'll probably, again, not being a chemist, I'll get it all terribly wrong and somebody will go, oh, look at these guys, I don't know what they're talking about. But there are reasons why the higher protein rest is generally favoured. The reason why I haven't gone with that one is because I wanted to really, if you're in the high 50s, you're in beta amylase conversion range. And I wanted to really control how long I was there for. So I've gone with the low 50s to stay a little bit more out of that range, so that when I do hit that sort of first saccharification step, I'm there for sort of 30 minutes before I move on to the next step. That's my thinking behind that. But you could definitely do like, say, a 57 degree step in place of a 52 and you'd get a really good result out of that as well. You might just need slightly less time at your sort of 63 degrees. 63 degrees is actually the optimal temperature for beta amylase. So the two saccharification steps I've chosen are the absolute optimal temperatures for those two enzymes.
Those two steps. Just a quick question, which I've seen before. That 55 degree, roughly, that protein rest, is it dangerous to leave that there for too long? Is there a risk of thinning out, winding up with a beer that's too thin at the end of the day?
I have seen that. So I've only done a 10-minute rest, I think, at this one.
So my understanding is the general advice is 10, 15 minutes most. Just for anyone out there who is wondering.
Yeah. And one good thing about a protein rest, if you don't have any kind of dextrinous malts or crystal malts or things, is you can sort of break down some more of those proteins in a way that you won't lose them from the beer. So they'll kind of stick around and won't separate out in your hot break. And that can kind of help add a bit of body.
Yep.
But it can, like Joel was saying, go the other way and make it sort of thin and insipid. So you kind of have to play it by ear with how you go with it. I think the best way to do these sorts of things is look up some different mashing regimes from trusted sort of brewers and see what they kind of talk about. We've got a bunch of books here, which are the classic, what are they called? The ones like the each individual style ones? I think it's the Classic Styles series, or... Anyway, if you jump on our website, we've got
there's one on malt, so that might be...
So we've got the malt, water, hops and yeast one. And the malt one will definitely have some really good information on this sort of stuff. But also, we've got a book here called Bavarian Helles. And it's like that thick, and it's just about this style of beer. So if you really want to get into the kind of nitty gritty of the style and the techniques and the kind of approaches to brewing it, if you read that book, you'll be brewing better Helles than probably anybody else.
Yeah, I'll post a link if anyone's interested. I'll see if I can do that.
And yeah, so I've kind of covered the other two steps. They're just your standard sugar conversion steps. I've gone a beta amylase rest for about half an hour and an alpha amylase for about 20 minutes-ish. You could go longer, but I won't need it. Even though I said these malt, like this base malt was less modified, it's still fairly well modified, so we'll get full conversion by the time we hit the end of our mash.
Most modern malts, it's going to be a tongue twister there, are generally quite modified.
It's looking good.
Yeah, so no more questions seem to be coming through. Just turn my mic on. Yeah, no more questions seem to be coming through.
Excellent.
Everyone's seems quite content with what's going on, I gather.
Cool. Well, I'll keep moving through the little bit more into the style then.
Cool.
So we'll touch on the hops and stuff once we hit the boil and start adding them in. But I have here in my hands the. I'll hold it here.
Okay.
So you can sort of roughly see.
Let me just bear with me. Anyone who's interested.
So this is the BJCP style guidelines.
It's quite.
Circa 2008, because
there, read it. But yeah.
Circa 2008, because the 2014 changes that they made I don't love, but the 2008 ones I will like what I kind of studied when I went and got my judging thingy, my judging accreditation, certification, whatever you want to call it. And basically when you're wanting to brew a certain style of beer, it's a really good starting point to know what you're trying to achieve from that beer. So over time, you'll get to know what different grains, different hops, different temperatures, like all those little things that you incorporate into your brew and into your sort of recipe design. Over time, you'll get to know what they do, and so when you're crafting a recipe, you can factor that in. So the way that they basically set it up is it will go through usually sort of 9 or 10 different sort of subheadings under the style. And if you were to enter your beer into a competition for judging, this is what the judges will be trying to objectively comment on your beer. So it's always broken down into aroma, appearance, flavour, mouthfeel, and overall impression are your main categories. And then you'll also have your vital statistics, so like the range for your starting and finishing gravities, how many IBUs, the colour, and the alcohol percentage. So when you're first getting started, the inclination is to look at those vital statistics and say, starting gravity between 1045 and 1051, light colour, this many IBUs. So then you just throw any grains and any hop combination into your kettle, which get you to those numbers and say, I made a Munich Helles. But obviously that's not going to yield you those results because there's more at play than just the numbers.
Yeah.
So when you go into the categories, it gives into those subheadings, it gives you lots of information about how the beer should be. And I think the other important thing is if you're trying to sort of brew a specific style of beer is buy a few different commercial versions of it, drink them, figure out what's sort of common across them, and then jump on the net and look at a bunch of different recipes and look at what's common across them. And so when you are starting out, you can still kind of build recipes. It just takes a little bit more work of doing that sort of delicious research.
Yeah.
And also, like I said, looking at a few different recipes, preferably from trusted sources.
Yeah.
To see what's common across them and what's likely to be the important parts, because the things that differ are going to be the kind of less important aspects, but the things that are common is going to be where you want to be focusing. So,
yeah. I second that notion of drink commercial examples where you can. That's the best. One of the best ways to educate yourself on what a particular style is, or why it is what it is.
And actively drink them.
Yep.
So
critical
there's sitting down and smashing down a pint of it and going, oh yeah, but like really kind of print out a copy or like jump on the net and look at the style guidelines while you're drinking it. And as you're smelling it, like under aroma it says pleasantly grainy, sweet, clean Pils malt aroma dominates. Low to moderately low spicy noble hop aroma and a low background note of DMS. So I'm going to try not to have any DMS in this one. It's not important. But yeah, so as you're smelling that glass of Munich Helles that you've bought, be trying to find those smells. So like that grainy, sweet, bready Pils kind of malt. Look for that, see if you can find it. When you have a taste, slightly sweet, malty profile, grain and Pils malt flavors, medium low hop bitterness, moderately low hop flavor, clean, no esters, no diacetyl. So again, like as you're tasting it, like look for those things that it's describing, and you'll be able to, like when you read it and it gets in your head, you'll be able to notice it. And a huge part of actively tasting beer is building those connections between what you're smelling and tasting and the words that are associated to them. And one of the best ways to build those connections is to read what should be in the beer when you're drinking a classic version of it, and then looking for those things. And then next time you're drinking a beer and you notice that, you're like, oh, that's grainy sweet, or that's Pils malt, that's this.
I on just a personal story, I didn't know what the difference between a Helles and a Pilsner was. I mean, I did on paper until we got some in at the shop and I was able to try them side by side, and they're quite different when and then just something clicks, you go, oh, that's what it is. Yeah, it's German Pils, hoppy, sort of, it's got a bit of a punch to it, and yeah, the Helles, very soft, just very drinkable. It's subtle but different. I don't know how to describe it. But
yeah, and
it was an eye-opener.
They are very similar beers, but they're also very different. And it's that active engagement in when you're drinking a beer, like really helps you understand that. And as a brewer, I think it's really important to be kind of actively engaging in those sorts of things, because that's how you develop your skills. That's how you can assess the beers that you're making and make adjustments and really kind of grow. And I think pursuing, like, I'm very much a big advocate for brewing to style.
Yes, right.
I think eventually, like, break out of that and brew whatever you want, and it's fun and it's awesome, and I love doing that too. But brewing to style gives you something to pursue. It gives you a target.
Yeah, and a discipline. And
a discipline. And that target is what kind of drives you to really actively engage with your sensory analysis, with your recipe design, with all those different things, and pushes you to develop and grow. I think it's a really really useful thing.
Another personal story is and perhaps this is very common for new brewers. You think, oh, awesome! I can be creative and make all these crazy beers that no one's ever made before. And I think I, at the time, made some beers I was quite happy with, but looking back, they were probably a little bit rubbish, to be honest. But that's sort of just something you got to go through, and you don't want to. I'm not saying that anyone should limit their creativity, but there is definitely something to be said for nailing down styles and pursuing those pre-established styles that are out there. You'll learn a lot more than you will, at least I did, from just sort of making stuff up as I went along and just,
Yeah, and you've got to have fun as well.
But you got to have fun.
You got to have fun.
You got to have fun, and whatever works for you as a brewer that you enjoy.
One of the main things that drove me to starting brewing, apart of one of the biggest ones was being able to drink fresh examples of a lot of beer styles that we can never drink freshly because no one brews them.
Yes.
But one of the big driving sort of influences was I had all these ideas and I thought, oh, I'm going to make all these beers that no one's ever dreamed of or drank before, and going to innovate and make. And you know what? People have been brewing for 10,000 years. Everyone has, like, no matter how good your idea is, someone's done it before.
Someone's already done it. Yeah.
And that's not to discourage you from doing it, because like
totally.
someone might not have done it for 3,000 years, so you might be like really doing something cool.
Yeah.
But I had a heap of fun doing that. And every beer I had would have some wacky ingredient or like some strange thing that I'd thrown into the Saison. Tasted really good as a jazz beer, but not as a Saison.
Yeah,
or like maybe my fruit tingle this or my musk stick that or whatever the hell I was brewing. Like maybe they just tasted good because they tasted like the thing that I was throwing at them and not like the actual beer itself. So I think it was Riggers here actually who one day said to me, can you brew a Pilsner? And I was just like, I've never tried. I'm not really that excited. I was like, well, how do you know you're a good brewer then?
He threw down the gauntlet,
I don't know. And he was like, when you can brew a good Pilsner, then go back to your wacky, crazy things and see then if they're better.
Yep.
And that's when pursuing those styles, and particularly like the more challenging styles as well, becomes really, I think, a good thing to do, so that you can go and develop. And then you can go back to those wacky, crazy things, but with the knowledge and the technique that you've developed through sort of honing and chasing that craft.
Yeah, all right, everyone. I think it's break time again.
Okay.
I'm going to tend to some camera stuff. So it'll be a short break this time. I've put a timer in the window just so you know how long, you have to wait till we come back. Go grab yourselves a beer or a non-alcoholic beverage. And if that's your preference, I will be right back. are back.
G'day, we're back. Yeah, we're sort of just giving the camera a bit of a rest every sort of half hour or so it keeps recording and you keep seeing my eyes and nothing else. So I thought, I did want to, we did actually have a question about why we were doing the protein rests, and you're spot on. We did actually mention at the start as well, like malt these days is really well modified, so most of the protein's already been broken down, but I have a Braumeister. Literally it's just pushing a few extra buttons to do an extra step. And I'm also a massive wanker, so when I'm doing like German style beers and it's really easy for me to do like multi-step rests, so multi-step mashes, why not?
Yeah, I do that too. I have a Braumeister as well, and it's like, I'll just do it because I can, really. There's no, it's fun. Just part of
it's really good fun. And I again, wanker, but I do think that you get a different beer from doing that rather than just doing a single step mash. Like, how could you not, right? Like, there's different chemical processes that have happened to the beer. So, yeah, I think it's worth doing. And, you connect it to the history of the way that the beer's been traditionally brewed as well. Speaking of, history. So, I am also a bit of a history nerd. And beer history, I think, is really fascinating because it's driven a lot of changes societally. Things like refrigeration, germ theory, civilization basically wouldn't exist were it not for people trying to brew better beer. And this style of beer has had such a massive impact on beer globally, because it really did, this and Pilsner, the two kind of pale golden lagers. I think something over 90% of beer brewed in the world today is a variation or kind of a spin-off of those two styles, which is massive. And it all happened really quickly over a very short space of time as well. So I guess when we're talking about European pale beers, you kind of have to talk about, there's three people, but we're in Bavaria, so we're going to talk about two people specifically. So Gabriel Siedelmeier and Anton Dreher. So Gabriel Siedelmeier, and I should say Gabriel Siedelmeier the second because his dad was the first Gabriel Siedelmeier that was at the head of Spartan Brewery in Bavaria. And Spartan were always like a really innovative brewery. They were kind of pushed a lot of boundaries, doing a lot of really interesting and kind of awesome things. But when he passed away and the brewery changed hands over to his son was good friends with Anton Dreher, who was an Austrian brewer from Vienna. And they became really interested, verging on obsessed with some of the English malting techniques that were sort of being developed at that time. So this is kind of mid to late 1800s. Yeah, I'm going to say mid 1800s. I love history, but I'm terrible at dates and times. It's a horrible combination of things to have.
It happened at some point.
But basically, they the two of them went on a tour with a third person actually, who was the Czech, the person who started brewing pilsners. But they went on a tour of different breweries and malting facilities throughout England and learned about the new malting techniques that they were developing, which was allowing them to have a much paler malt. So that's kind of where British Pale Ale comes from, is from this sort of new malting technique. And they came back to Europe where most of the beers were quite dark. So like you're talking about your Dunkels and your sort of rich, dark sort of Bavarian beers. And wanted to introduce this pale malt into the picture. So Anton Dreher went back to Vienna and he basically developed Vienna malt. And from Vienna malt came Vienna lager, which is very different now. So when you say Vienna lager now, you think of beers like Negra Modelo, which is the Mexican quite dark version. And I think they've recently added an extra category for Mexican style Vienna lager.
He's interested that they're Mexican Vienna lagers now.
I think a lot of Austrians moved to Mexico and brought that style with them, and it kind of developed like a lot of beer styles do, based on the water source and a bunch of other things. So they obviously, the water was a lot harder. They needed more dark malts to counter the pH buffering that was present from the carbonate in the water. So the beer got a lot darker. But traditionally, Vienna lager was quite a pale beer, but it had a real rich malty kick from that sort of darker kilned, more toasty Vienna malt. And Gabriel Siedelmeier developed Munich malt, which was where the Märzen came from, or the Oktoberfest beer, which we now call it. So, and that's why I get really pedantic about my my Märzens and my Viennas, and say, when I make a Vienna lager, I go 100% Vienna malt, and when I make a Märzen, I go 100% Munich malt.
Excellent that you bring that up. There was a question about how a Helles compares to a Märzen or Fest beer. So I guess that's on.
That's a really good question, and that's exactly where we're taking this, because we're about to hit some pretty interesting history on that specifically. So even just having these paler beers like the Märzen and the Vienna, but Märzen specifically because we're talking Bavaria now. Bavarian brewing and brewers were very conservative, so they didn't want this change in like they were really tied to the tradition of their dark beers, their Bocks, their Dunkels. They didn't want these paler beers coming into play. And then Pilsner happened. So Pilsner was like pretty much one of the palest malts that had been developed at this point. And basically, I can't remember his name, which really annoys me, but he was a brewer who went to Bavaria, learned the Bavarian brewing techniques like lagering, and the story goes, stole some Bavarian yeast, took it back to Bohemia with him because Czechoslovakia didn't exist back then. And brewed a beer with this really pale malt with the local super soft Pilsen water. So Pilsen's a town in Czechoslovakia or Bohemia. And used those spicy floral Saaz hops, and the resulting beer was Pilsner, and it just took off. It was, as you guys should all know, I'm assuming everyone's drank Pilsner that's watching a brewing demonstration.
It'd be hard to avoid these times, isn't it?
Super drinkable, crystal clear, which was unheard of at this point in the beer world. Like even the pale ales in Britain were fairly clear, but nothing like this. Like a well-lagered pale beer, pale lager just drops so clear, and it was almost like they were drinking water compared to the beers that they were sort of used to.
It was the forefront of technology, really, wasn't it, at the time, with refrigeration and just brewing practices in general.
Yeah, well, I mean, so refrigeration hadn't kicked off yet, I don't.
Yeah. Oh, really? Prior? No, I'm thinking of. Oh man, I just.
But we are going to touch on refrigeration.
Czech pills is what I think I'm going to. Anyway.
Because old mate Gabriel Siedelmeier was actually the first person to incorporate refrigeration into a brewery as well for fermentation. But so basically Pilsner just took off, ran wild, and everyone everywhere was drinking Pilsners, except Bavaria, where they hated these stupid pale beers and they thought it was just a fad and it was never going to take off, and everyone would go back to their delicious dark Dunkels and Bocks and things once the craze wore off, which didn't happen at all, as you guys all know. So basically Gabriel was kind of experimenting with a bunch of different things. His sort of Märzen, which was like with the Munich malt and things, had kind of been a little bit more accepted by the Bavarian brewing community. But he was like, you could imagine it must have been pretty disheartening being a Bavarian brewer, like tied to your beautiful amber and dark beers, and then every time you leave Bavaria, you go into a beer garden, you just see glass after glass of this gold, crystal clear Pilsner beers. And he was like, this is crazy, we need to get in on this. So he developed his own pale beer, and he called it Helles, which is basically means light or bright in German. And it was different to a Pilsner. He didn't just make a Pilsner. Because he was working with Bavarian water, he was working with his own malt that he'd kind of sort of made, and like a whole bunch of other sort of things at play, and also using Bavarian hops rather than those sort of Bohemian
Which
hops.
again goes back to your point earlier about how styles are really much a product of the regions that they come from.
Absolutely. There's lots of different factors at play which kind of styles grow out of. There's water source, there's economic reasons. So a lot of Belgian beers styles developed based on the taxing system for like how breweries were taxed. So I think you were taxed based on the size of your mash tun. Yeah. So Belgian breweries started doing what we now call turbid mashing, where they just fit as much malt and as little water into their mash tun as possible to get the absolute maximum output from a small mash tun, so they fit into the lower tax bracket. Yeah, so all sorts of weird social and environmental things at play, which kind of beer styles spring out of. So he using the local hops, using the local water, using the malting techniques he'd picked up from the UK. All these things kind of culminated in this beer that he called a Helles. And as you can probably imagine, people loved it, but the Bavarian brewing community wasn't so keen on it. They called him a sellout. They had like big meetings where they were decrying it and saying he was what was the quote? Something about how he was giving Pilsners like a backdoor into the Bavarian beer culture so that they could destroy brewing tradition.
So like enemy at the gates kind of thing.
All of that sort of classic, overzealous, hand-wringing, conservative terror that always happens. Yep. They didn't want progress. They didn't want any change to how things were. But eventually, economic considerations. Excuse me. I'm talking a lot, which is why I'm coughing. I'm not plague-ridden, as far as I know.
Yes, and you're an asthmatic too.
I am asthmatic too. So the mask does get a little bit oppressive over time. Yeah. Economically speaking, they were looking at how successful Spartan was getting with their delicious Helles beer, and looking at how much less successful they were being with their usual offerings. So one by one, they all kind of eventually caved and started brewing their own versions of the Munich Helles, and it's still to this day. If you're in most parts of Germany, you'll get Pilsner, but if you're in Bavaria, like everyone's drinking Helles.
Helles, yep. Interesting.
And yeah, like I said, all of these different massive beer styles, like like locally, you look at things like Carlton Draft, VB. You look at like your Carlton Draft, your VB, your Tui's, all those things. Like them or not, were inspired by these. I mean, Pilsners and Helles is like these pale European lagers, which have kind of grown up out of that sort of series of events in the 1800s. And yeah, that kind of brings us to where we are now. It's was quite dynamic and sort of controversial at the time, which I love. Like, I reckon that's awesome. we should be pushing boundaries. We should be challenging the orthodoxy where we can. So good on you, Spartan, for knocking out what is easily, I think, my favourite beer style. Just purely on drinkability. It's one of those beers where when you're thirsty and you want a beer, there isn't a better beer for it. It's, you come home after like working like a hard day and you just need to crush a beer. You pour yourself a pint of Helles and it's gone in 3 sips. It really is that kind of thirst quenching, bulk quantity, Saturday afternoon with your mates sort of beer. But it's also, I think, one of the things I really love about it is that it's more than that. So you can buy a case of, say, like Budweiser or Miller's or Carlton Draft or any of those sorts of beers and slam down 20 of them over the course of a weekend. But with a Helles, you can sit down with a pint of it and really contemplate it as well. So you can drink it in quantity, but you can also sit there and smell it, taste it, and really experience it as well. It's a complex and interesting, yet subtle and extremely drinkable beer, and that's why it's good, because you've got so much going on with it.
Yeah, it's hard to describe, but you know, I think, as I was saying before, with the journey we go on as home brewers and beer drinkers, for me, I started out drinking big stinky ales and massively hopped IPAs and went through that phase. And it wasn't that long ago until I discovered good German Pilsners and just delight, Helles, and really growing an appreciation for them. It's now one of my favourite styles of beer, and I look forward to every time spring rolls around, I'm just sort of waiting for Steve to order in those wine Stefaners, and
Well, that's the other thing as well with these types of beers.
Good.
So, I mean, I love a Pilsner as well, and I think as well that like they're real brewers beers. Like Pilsner and Helles, like there's nowhere to hide. So as a brewer,
to make them,
you understand what goes into making them. So when you get a good one, you can appreciate how much skill and effort has gone into it, and that kind of adds to the experience of drinking it as well a bit. I think. Yeah.
If you and then brewing one as well, there's just so much more satisfaction that you get.
Yeah.
If you get it right, it's you just know that I don't know, you just get a feeling of accomplishment.
Yeah, it's not just throwing hops at a fermenter until it tastes good. Sort of thing,
which is.
And I mean, next demo I'm going to be doing is literally that as well. But you mentioned spring, and for me, like, there's nothing more rewarding than that first warm day of spring, like when the winter's like shaken off and you get that really beautiful sort of 20-25 degree day, clear skies, nice gentle breeze. Like, I need to drink a Pilsner. And I need to, like,
it's like having
cook some fish or something and like have a salad and just like shake off the sort of shackles. I love winter as well, but you sort of shake off the shackles of winter and just sort of embrace the
bring in the new season after having drunk, in winters, you're drinking your stouts and porters. I mean, it's probably a bit of a cliche, but it works, these bigger beers, the winter warmers, and then spring hits and it's Pilsner time.
Yeah, there's just something really special, just that crisp, clean, hoppy, dry. There's something really special about it, I think. Have we had any questions come through?
No, I mean, everyone's pretty quiet actually, so I hope everyone's pretty quiet.
They're all asleep.
So I hope that means they're just enthralled in what we're saying. No questions. Yeah. So, do you feel like you've covered the history there of that was your
a couple of the main points I want to hit. Yeah? I was trying to keep it to 30 minutes, so I might have glossed over some stuff, but
you are well under actually. We've got. Let's see, we will be having to head to another break in 10 minutes though. You got 10 minutes.
Yeah,
so,
I just sort of think understanding that knowing the sort of physical, tangible aspects of a beer is really sort of important to brewing it. But for me, understanding the historical kind of background behind the beer as well kind of adds to the experience as well. Like you see where it came from, you see how it became this thing, and even from a brewing perspective, that can be helpful when you're kind of trying to recreate it, because you're like, well, you know, like we were saying before, like the water source that people were using, that, you know, in Czechoslovakia, the Czech Pilsner, the reason why that beer was so successful was because the water in Pilsen was so incredibly soft that they were able to have a super pale malt and mash with it and have it not come out just horribly astringent. If you tried to do that in Dublin, you would get just a disgusting soapy mess of a beer. In much the same way, if you tried to brew a stout in Pilsen, you'd probably end up with a fairly acidic kind of, probably astringent as well, because I think if you go too low with your pH in your mash, you can end up
actually
ripping some tannins and stuff out as well.
Yep.
So like even just like geographic things like have a massive impact on the development of a style, and when you understand that, and when you're crafting your recipes, when you're building your water profile, when you're doing all those things, like as much information as you can get, it kind of puts, and again, wanker, puts me in the mind frame and puts me in the kind of the right place to sort of be thinking about what I'm doing and how I'm developing it.
Oh, no, that wasn't me. What we wanted to go. All good?
Sorry, we
just feel
we are still running as a business as well. So
we are a working homebrew shop. So
working mailroom in a working car park at the moment.
Company. As you were. Yeah. What were you talking about?
And yeah, I don't know. Without getting too philosophical, that's like I think I use history as a perspective and a lens through most things in life.
And it's just interesting, especially in most things in life, but as it is in brewing for us as home brewers, to learning the history helps give the beers context, and I think it just helps us become better brewers from recipe formulation to the practice, you know, the physical steps of actually brewing.
And it gives us a connection as well.
Yeah.
So we've got, 10,000 odd years of brewing history behind us, and as soon as you pick up a mash paddle, you're a part of that.
Yep.
So kind of, I don't know, you're taking up the mantle and kind of carrying on the legacy of all those people that came before you, and that is sort of something worth, I guess, honouring is probably a little bit stronger word, but you know, worth keeping in mind, and it feels good to be connected to that. And the more you understand it, the more you kind of are able to feel that connection as well, I think. Yeah,
on that note, we've had some comments on previous videos in the past on decoction. I believe one stands out for memory, which is a traditional brewing practice that don't need to do anymore. And we had a question about really, you know, why do the mash steps if modern malts are so well modified? And those are all excellent kind of points and questions. That sometimes, as we're saying, the answer is you just do it because, as a bit of a challenge to yourself, but also just to recreate a bit of brewing history, and it's just fun to get in touch with the way things used to be done, and
absolutely
part of the fun of brewing.
And a huge part of it comes down to what you want from the hobby as well.
Yep. Everyone does it
if you want to make the only thing you want from the hobby is to make really, really good quality beer, and that's a very noble pursuit, then you probably can achieve that without going to all those extra sort of lengths. But I think there is something nice about kind of doing that. And there's beer archaeology as well, which I don't know if you guys have heard of Dogfish Head Brewery in America. But Sam, their head brewer, is obsessed with beer archaeology and has done heaps of kind of ancient beers where he'll like take his yeast master, I don't know what the official term is, the microbiologist that he works with. But in one instance, they went to Egypt, and it's the oldest known image of brewing beer is a hieroglyphic on a pyramid.
Oh, okay.
And they
one with the
took that image and tried to work backwards historically and like what kind of spices and flavorings were available and likely to be used at the time. From that picture, like what does it look like the process was. They captured wild yeast from under the pyramids, like with a bunch of yeast traps, and then cultured them up. And so they made this ancient beer based on the grains and the seasonings and the wild yeast that was present in Egypt, like saying like this could potentially be what they were drinking.
Yeah. Is that the
5, 6, 7,000 years ago? They made a show about it.
Oh, okay. I know there was someone took samples from some earth pots somewhere too and did a chemical analysis to try and recreate the beer that was made at the time, based on the information they got from that. But
yeah, it could well have been the same thing. Like they did a heap of things, and they actually had a show that they made, which is called Beer Masters. But I don't think
on YouTube.
It was on Netflix, but it was on the American Netflix. So unless you got a VPN, you might not be able to grab it.
Yeah.
But really interesting. They did lots of different sort of historical beers on that show. Yeah.
Cool. All right. That was a good discussion. I think we've. People have expressed that it was interesting. We're going to have to take another break. I see a couple of questions coming through. We'll get to those later. But yeah, again, just got to give the camera a little bit of a rest. So bear with us. We'll be right back in a jiff. back.
We is back. Yay.
We is back. All right. So
I was just saying, we've just hit our second sugar conversion rest. And I'm kind of poking my head in here periodically to have a look at the wort. It is looking gorgeous. I would show you, but the steam would make it such that you would not be able to see.
yeah, we've tried that on other streams to get images of the wort, and it just doesn't translate well.
Yeah, but a beautiful, super pale gold, which is exactly what we're kind of wanting to achieve with this sort of style of beer. And I mentioned before, like there's a bunch of different folks who will use more complex grain bills in this style of beer. And if you do that, you will get a slightly darker colour to the beer. But as long as it's within the range of kind of acceptable colour, you're fine. So I know Jamil Zainasheff, who's kind of pretty well known as a bit of a style guru. I think in his Helles recipe, he uses Munich malt and a bit of melanoidin as well, to boost the malt flavour up a little bit. I'm actually going to be relying very heavily on the yeast for the malt character in my beer. So another one of the big differences for me between a German Pils and a Munich Helles is the yeast that I use. So when I'm brewing a German Pils, I use the 2124 Bohemian Lager yeast, which is unofficially that's the Weisse 2124, which is unofficially the Weinstefan 3470 lager strain. The most commonly used lager strain of yeast in the world, as far as I'm aware. So it gives you a really clean, really crisp, very dry and neutral kind of fermentation profile. So for a Pilsner, perfect. For German Pilsner, I should say, perfect. It gives you exactly the right mouthfeel, exactly the right malt presence, keeps out of everything's way, and then lets the hops that you put in there shine through and kind of do what they need to do. With a Bavarian beer, or with Bavarian beers generally, I think the malt flavour is really important. You want the beer to dry out, which by that I mean attenuate fully. So you get, so I'm getting itchy under this mask, I should have shaved.
They're a pain, aren't they, after a while?
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I've actually, I see that Joel's done the same thing as me. I've modified it with a cable tie and a lacquer band so that it's
packing.
not rubbing on the back of my ears as much. But you want there to be lots of malt flavour, but you still want it to fully attenuate. So ferment out as many of the available sugars as possible so that it ends up nice and dry and with the right mouthfeel. And again, that comes down to what I was saying before about needing to be able to drink it by the litre in a beer garden. That attenuation, that sort of fully fermented character of those beers is what lets you do that. So even like something like a big Manson, or even like some of the Box, maybe not the Box, but definitely like a Manson or a Munich Dunkel, you can drink a lot of those beers and still be thirsty. They're very moorish, and that comes down to that fermentation profile, that really dry finish on them. But when you drink them, they're still full of malt flavour, like really rich, really intense flavour. But once you've swallowed the beer, it's gone. So the yeast is a really critical part of that. So the yeast that I use in a Munich Helles, and in pretty much any Bavarian beer that I brew that isn't like a Hefeweizen, is the Yeast 2206, which is the Bavarian lager yeast. There is another yeast called Munich Lager. I know a lot of people swear by that yeast. Personally, I don't like it for my brewing. The thing about yeast is every yeast strain is different. It has its idiosyncrasies, it has its personality. and it's going to act in a specific way when subjected to specific conditions. So different brewers have different approaches, like the way that you approach a recipe, the way that you approach the brewing process, the way that you approach fermentation. They're going to, in a lot of ways, be unique to you. And what you'll find is that certain yeasts are going to respond to the conditions that you provide them better than others. So a lot of people swear by the Munich Lager, the 2308, and they obviously have brewing practices which are beneficial to that yeast, or which work well with that yeast. Personally, I don't like my beers when I ferment them with the 2308, but the 2206 is perfect for me. What I love about it is you get a really, really strong, rich, almost cookie dough-like malt character from it.
Okay.
So whatever, I think for me, like a lager fermentation, it's about highlighting the ingredients that went into the wort more than it is about the yeast itself. So an ale yeast is kicking off all these different esters and these different spicy notes and characters, and turns the wort into ale. It takes all these flavors and makes it into a new thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas lager yeast, like a nice cold, slow fermented lager yeast, it takes the flavors that are in there and it kind of keeps them in place. Like obviously it will be different. It's going to be a lot less sweet because you've turned the sugars into alcohol, but you get the flavor of the malt that you use, you get the flavor of the hops that you use, and you don't get much of anything else. Like it really sort of cleans up and clarifies the flavors of the ingredients that you've thrown in there, but they'll still have different ways of doing that. So what the 2206 does is it really lets the malt shine through and gives it that oomph and that sort of body. And again, because I'm only using Pilsner malt, I need all the help I can get to beef up that malt flavor and that malt character. So by having having a yeast that really amplifies and sort of boosts that, I get pretty much exactly where I want to be. And it blows my mind every time, like how just using Pilsner malt, I can get such a big malt expression. And it's just that yeast. It's a monster. Wow. It's just brilliant.
That's a really good rundown. I think a conversation on yeast is really helpful because we do get lots of questions about, especially these beers where the recipes or the ingredients on the malt side are really basic. And that just highlights how important and how different yeast make an impact. That was interesting. I actually learned something there, so I'll be taking that into my brewing. Yeah, anyway.
There's probably like some pro brewer, someone that's watching is like, what is this guy talking about? He's all wrong. But I mean, like I'm talking from experience, right? Yeah. Like it's very anecdotal.
Absolutely. Yeah. But you are the resident lager guy. I would.
I mostly brew like I've brewed probably 3 lagers for every non-lager that I've brewed. So I kind of there's more anecdotal stories about brewing from lagers for me than other styles. Yeah. Were you saying there was a question before as well, actually?
Earlier, there were a couple of questions. Haven't come through recently. I was just writing in the chat there and in a basic way, referring to them. But we had a question about Australian versions of Helles. Which we talked about during the break, which is my challenge.
I can't think of one. It's possible that
some small.
I feel like I've had them before, and I feel like I've had 1 or 2 good ones as well, but I can't off the top of my head remember.
Sow and Piglets did come up. I don't think they do a Helles.
Sow and Piglets do really good German beers though. So if you see them in a fridge and you feel like trying a good example of a German beer, definitely buy it because Julian, their head brewer, was trained in Germany and he knows how to make good German beer.
They specialise in it really, don't they?
It's
German
absolutely.
Beers are their jam.
I think, you know what, I think it was on the Great Ocean Road, there's a brewery that we popped into for dinner once after visiting some family down there.
Oh yeah?
Can't remember the name of the brewery, but it's like a big brewery, like on the kind of, as you're heading towards the start of the Great Ocean Road, it's like on the right-hand side.
Okay.
But it's like a big sort of brewery / restaurant pub sort of thing. So if you're ever down that way and you see something like I just described, I think it's near Anglesey maybe.
Yeah, cool.
They're pretty good. I think they had a good Helles.
You're fine.
But it really is. It's hard to find a good one because it's hard to make a good one. It's probably more the point.
There are engineering challenges for breweries to do lagers in general. There's a lot of power required for cooling, and it's
a different setup.
Yeah, different setup to that.
If your brewery is set up, and most breweries in Australia are, because just that's what's popular. If your brewery is set up to do hoppy ales, then making a good lager is a complete change of process from what your sort of all your gear is set up to do, what all your brewing team is trained to do with your gear. So it's a very different thing. It takes some doing, and I think a lot of breweries that make lagers maybe don't go through all the steps to sort of nail it down perfectly. Like they probably cut a few corners in order to achieve it. And I mean, they do some really great jobs. I mean, a brilliant example is Hawker's German Pils.
Okay,
that's a really good German Pils. And I'm sure if they did a Helles, they'd do a really good Helles as well.
Yes.
Those guys. No affiliation.
Yes, with any of these.
But I've found that those guys, every beer that they bring out is kind of a textbook example of whatever style they're trying to make. So their saison is a textbook saison, they may not be doing like beers as exciting as say like a red skin stout like Moondog did or something like that.
Kaiju sort of.
But the beers that they are doing are kind of real sort of classic examples of the type of beer that they're making, and their German Pils is a really good example of a German Pils. I can't though think of a
Helles. Yeah,
and like I said, I know that they exist, and I've definitely drank one or two and thought this is really good.
I remember Malt Shovel or someone like that doing it years ago. You know, one of those
minimum chips, I think they called it, or something.
Something like that, perhaps. Or it was Helga, or it was one of those. Anyway, I digress.
I think even down on the Mornington Peninsula, there might be a couple as well of breweries out there that are doing those sorts of things.
Yeah. That was the question. Isaac did make a comment about, was not really a question, more a comment about Dogfish Head making chicha.
Yeah,
and that's just a really interesting experiment.
On that same TV show that I mentioned, it was a really funny episode actually, because he had the traditional way that it's made in Peru is they pick the corn and they chew on it, and there's amylase enzymes in saliva, and that amylase breaks down the starches in the corn as they chew on it in the fields, and they spit it into their buckets, take it back, throw it all into the mash tun, boil it up, and then that's your chicha. So he wanted to do it the traditional way, so he had every staff member of his brewery like with their little spit bucket chewing on a big sack of corn, and just how miserable they all were. Their jaws were sore, and
walking into the brewery on that day
sucked all of the saliva out of their mouths and made them really dry. Yeah, they weren't happy.
If anyone's seen the movie Medicine Man, that's an old Sean Connery, movie that's referenced in that.
Oh, cool. But I guess back to yeast and fermentation.
Right, yeah.
I get easily sidetracked.
Sorry, as you were.
But the fermentation profile that I use for making lagers is, the way that you ferment the beer is going to be really important. And there's a bunch of different approaches to making lagers. Some people pitch warm and then drop it down. Some people pitch cold and then ramp it up. There's all these different ways of doing it. When my first lager that I made, I had no idea what I was doing. I pitched one smack pack of yeast into a probably too high gravity wort. And tried to ferment it out. I ended up with massive amounts of diacetyl, just a horrible, horrible attempt. And it was so bad that I was like, I'm determined to learn how to do this properly. So I read a bunch of stuff, and the first thing I read about the temperature profile of a lager fermentation, I've stuck with, and I've done that every time since, because when I did it, it worked perfectly. I'm like, I'm not going to change that. I'm going to keep doing it that way. So I pitch my lagers at 7 degrees Celsius, which is cold. But the reason why I do that is that things like the precursors to diacetyl and a lot of the other kind of common lager faults all sort of happen in that early stage of the fermentation. So the colder I can make it in the initial stages, the less of those precursors are going to get thrown off, and the less I'm going to have to clean it up later.
Interesting, yeah. Okay, so you pitch, and I do this too, just in general with my beers, I'll pitch a bit below the target temperature and just let it free rise. So you say, yeah, with your lagers, pitch at 7.
I pitch them at 7.
General,
and part of doing that, because it is so cold, I really make sure that I've got way more yeast than I need. So when you're looking at your pitching rate calculators and stuff, which we haven't really spoken much about on these demos before.
And maybe we'll do, when we do a yeast, at some point we'll be planning to do a yeast starter video. We may touch on that then.
Yeah, so I won't go into too much detail now.
Matt's just, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I've got no, yeah, it's work. I was just pointing out, that's Matt back there for anyone watching, moving the Braumeister. Again, we are a working brew shop. I'll get out of the way.
But you get onto your sort of online yeast calculators, and they will give you an idea based on the date of manufacturing of your yeast and on the bunch of other variables, which, I mean, yeah, it's kind of useful to input that, but I think the more important thing is just like put one smack pack into X amount of starter at X gravity, and you're going to get X amount of viable cells at the end of it. So what I always try to make sure I do is massively overshoot what they suggest I'm going to need for a lager. And when I say massively, like, I'm not talking like double the amount, but if the yeast calculator is telling me that for a lager, I'm going to need, I don't know, say 800 billion cells, for example. And I'm putting things into my calculator and it comes up with 900 billion cells, then I'm happy with that. If it comes up with 801 billion cells, I'm putting a bit more in my starter.
Yeah, so I think that, and this is some good advice in general for yeast, especially for lagers, is over pitching is better than under pitching.
Yeah.
There's
two amounts of yeast for a lager. There's enough yeast and not enough yeast, and you want to be in the enough yeast category.
Yeah, there's no such thing as too much yeast. I mean, there probably is in certain circumstances, but for all intents and purposes,
you're highly unlikely to hit that number in a homebrew setting.
And for lagers, you're better off just going nuts.
So yeah, so I pitch a massive pitch of super healthy, super fresh yeast, 7 degrees into my fermenter. And in an ideal world, I won't be for this beer because obviously doing it here, but I will, once it hits a boil, pull off a couple of litres of the wort from the kettle into my flask, and that's what I'll do my starter in. And then I'll pitch the whole thing into my fermenter at high Krausen.
Yep.
And that just means that it's active and it's going the second it hits the wort. And there's no lags. There's no lag time in there.
Yeah.
When you're pitching it, like I've had at 10 degrees, so pitch a 7, let it free rise up to 10 and hold it there for the whole fermentation. I pitched a starter of 2124 into a German Pils at 10 degrees. It rocketed through and it was completely dry within 5 days at 10 degrees.
Wow.
That blew my mind because that's very much not a normal thing, but it can be a thing that happens. So I'm a big advocate for pitching at high Krausen. If you can't pitch at high Krausen, for instance, if you're using we sell little yeast starter packs here, which is 250 grams of malt extract and some yeast nutrient, gets you 2.5 litres of starter. If you're using that, I wouldn't pitch the whole thing. I would let it do its thing for say 24 hours, then put it in the fridge, let the yeast sink out to the bottom and decant most of the liquid off the top, because if you're putting 2.5 litres of the beer is going to be not your beer.
Yep.
And it's going to have flavours that you're not wanting to sort of be in, particularly in a Helles, where you will notice it.
Yes, for sure.
So you want to decant most of the liquid off carefully and then add only as much as you need to get the yeast in suspension.
So in summary, when using wort fresh from your brew, using that as a starter, pitch the whole thing, that's great. But if you're making a starter from DME, then obviously, you want to chill it, decant it, pour off as much of that liquid as possible, and add the slurry to your beer.
Yeah, and
so
try and if you are doing a real wort starter, try to run your starter if you've got a stir plate, have it in your fermenting fridge under the conditions that you'll be fermenting the beer at.
Yeah, okay.
So then you're producing the same kinds of esters and the same kinds of things.
Basically, ferment the starter at a lager temperature, the same temperature you're going to be
or a lot colder.
So
it may not have to be 10 degrees, but if you do it at say 15 rather than 25,
yep.
Then you're going to get you won't get all those big esters and things like that, and you'll be laughing.
Yeah. You're probably seeing a picture that lagers, to do them well, there are extra steps involved. You don't have to sort of do all the steps, but you can see how far down, the sort of
the more boxes you tick in the best practice sort of notebook, the better in general, the better your beers are going to be. But there's less leeway with a lager than there is with an ale.
Yeah, that's
you get away with less. And particularly a pale lager like a Helles, where there's nowhere really to hide faults. You want to be ticking as many best practice boxes as you can. So well oxygenated wort, which, as we said before, is now all of a sudden a point of contention. But yeah, well oxygenated wort, a really strong, healthy, good pitch of the right type of yeast, and good control of your fermentation temperatures is really what's going to look after you. And it's really only 3 things to do.
Yeah.
And once you understand how to achieve those things, then you'll nail every single lager you do in terms of the fermentation. It's literally just a matter of getting those 3 things into your processes. And you won't have any dramas with it. One thing I do with 2206, which is different from other ones. So normally I'll pitch at 7, let it rise up to 10 and hold it at 10 the whole way. I find 2206 needs a bit of encouragement at the end. So it'll drop down to sort of 1014, 1013, and then I'll give it an extra couple of degrees just to get it through those last few gravity points. If I don't do that, it can finish a little heavy in the mouth. But that's not every time. And I do think it's really important to use your senses with a lot of this. So take a gravity reading, use your hydrometer and measure it, but also smell it, taste it, play it by ear. If for whatever reason something has happened somewhere along the lines, some part of your process is interacting with the yeast in a certain way, then you want to be able to intervene with that. So you may find that when you use this yeast at the same temperatures that I say, for whatever reason, some part of your process has meant that you do have diacetyl, in which case you want to be on top of that. You want to be elevating those temperatures to let the yeast chew that up and get rid of it. I think sensory analysis with lagers is really important because you want to make sure that you're getting that good clean fermentation. Yeah,
being objective about your beers too, trying to spot any flaws, I guess, is the way to put it. Without being hard on yourself, Just like,
it's a proactive fermentation. It's not a set and forget. It's you're engaged in the process from start to finish. Which is nice. It's rewarding.
I agree. Quick shout out to Paul, who can't watch this, but is listening to us while painting his rooms.
Oh, hell yeah.
Cheers for the comments, Paul. We are going to go to another break. Got to give the camera a rest. Blah blah blah. Now, by the time we come back, how is the mash going?
We are
still a ways
4
off.
minutes to go.
4 minutes to go.
Of the mash out,
so we're getting,
and then we'll pull the grain up.
We're getting close to the actual brewing part of the demo. Oh well, we've started the brewing part. We've been talking a lot because if you've just tuned in recently, we're doing a very long mash schedule today.
Sorry.
But that's gives us an opportunity to talk about lots of interesting things, I think, about the history and this waffle.
At least we can get through a 5-step mash in a reasonable amount of time with the Braumeister.
Yeah,
we don't have to be pulling things out, boiling and putting them back in.
Yeah, it just does it all by itself, while we can sit here and crap on. So, little break, and then when we come back, we'll be ready to, you'll see some actual brewing action.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, be right back.
We're back.
We are back, and we're getting into the exciting part of the day.
We've got about 1.5 minutes left of the mash out stage, and then we're going to pull the malt pipe up. We'll bring the liquid underneath to the boil. dump all the grains out, get some sort of stuff sorted out, and I've already measured out the hops. And yeah, and that's basically it. So I think we've touched on everything except hops from a stylistic point of view. So I may as well do that now while we're sort of waiting for these last few stages. This always backfires on me because then I have to stop talking and jump into actual action. There's like 3 stages throughout the brew where you actually have to do things. Yeah. But basically, I've probably mentioned before, with the Munich Helles, you want to basically use a Bavarian hop. So Magnum is a good Bavarian hop. You don't need to use much of that because it's got quite a high alpha acid percentage. But I've heard a lot of people say with Munich Helles that a simple 60-minute addition is plenty to get the hop. Oh, there we go. Plenty to get the hop character that you need. Meanwhile, I'm gonna, like I said, interrupt that thought and jump straight into the oh guys. The clarity.
Sorry, we can't convey the.
It's like
the smell.
Water, like pure crystal clear water, but like with a golden straw colour to it. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm just going to apologise to everyone. I'm going to step away from the computer for a moment and get some footage here. You're not going to be able to see this right now, but the beauty of YouTube is that we can upload videos later and you can watch them at your leisure. So I'm getting some footage here that will be used in a later video. We will, again, another note, we will be probably running a little bit over time today. So, you know, if anyone needs to go.
Might not go all the way to cubing.
We may skip a couple of
I think once we've touched on like the stuff on the hops, that's probably all we really need to cover, because you guys have seen us chuck wort into cubes plenty of times before.
A video on cubing. I'm going to do the YouTube thing. Click on the link above, which you won't see now because we're live, but I'll add it later.
So yeah, I am going to pull this out. I'm using a trivet. The Braumeister does come with a crossbar, which is really good. I am going to put a little bit of water through the grains though. I just find using a trivet means I can sort of see a little bit better exactly where on the central tie rod the liquid is coming to, so then I can kind of control volumes a little bit better. Speaking of which, I'm going to reconsider this. Normally I use a lower table, but I've incorporated the lower table into my little computer setup over in my office because I got a printer. So I will grab a step ladder and be right back.
We should put some waiting music while we're here.
And I might also get Joel to give me a hand. We'll see how I go.
Yep.
Just to slide the trivet in when needed. This is already
all right,
much
hang on,
better.
let me just make sure we're getting you.
I might be okay, actually.
Camera there, yeah. All right, sing out if you need a hand. Oh, can you do it?
Bear with me. So a really good thing to consider with Braumeisters and Berliner bags and things like that is some kind of winch.
Yes, yeah.
Or a hoist to lift the malt pipe out. Depending on what surface you're brewing on, obviously this table's quite high up and it creates challenges. I'm going to flip the ladder around because the problem is I'm lifting from the wrong side.
It's a bit of a janky ladder too, isn't it?
It is a bit of a janky ladder. So yeah, if you have a winch that you can winch the malt pipe up, particularly if you're on a 50 litre Braumeister, the grain can get quite heavy. And it's just a much safer way of doing things.
Would you like me to steady the ladder for you or anything? Or?
Should be all right. It's not too bad, this ladder. I just need to If you can grab the trivet.
Yep.
So I'll use 2 hands on the malt.
Can be a 2-person job, yeah, without a pulley.
Without a winch, yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause, yeah, there was no way I was lifting lifting that up with 1 hand.
Plus, you get that the kind of surface tension.
Yeah, so there's a rubber seal on the bottom of the malt pipe which helps. So as it's pumping, it's pulling the liquid from outside and pushing it up through the grains. But that rubber seal can kind of form a pretty strong seal. So yeah, you breaking and yeah, breaking through the surface of the liquid as well. It kind of get a bit of suction there. So now the malt pipe is out, though, I am going to quickly hit the tick to start it coming up to the boil. Because if I don't, it's going to take even longer. That's the classic mistake that a lot of people make with most brewing systems. Is they pull their grain out and then forget to turn the heater on underneath, forget to turn the gas stove on, forget to click the button to keep going, and then wonder why it's taking so long to come up to the boil.
Yeah, there's lots of little steps. It's easy to forget on brew day.
So I'm looking in there at the volume level. So we are probably sitting at about 23 litres in there. What I want to do, so with my recipe design for this one, I don't mind so much what gravity it comes out at because this is a homebrew. As long as it's within the range for the style, I'm pretty comfortable with it. But I was just talking about best practice. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to quickly run off, grab a refractometer. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about volume calculations. So 1 second. I should have done this morning.
I'll jump in. Yeah, we're still going. Yeah.
So this is a refractometer. So basically, it gives you. This one's a bit smudgy there. Oh man.
Maybe quickly, I don't know if we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. A really quick question there. Elijah has asked what material is used on the underside of the Braumeister. I assume they're referring to
this seal.
Seal there, yeah.
I'm guessing silicon.
Silicon, I think it is, yeah.
I don't know for sure to say definitively silicon, but I'd be very surprised if it wasn't.
I feel like it is, yeah.
It feels like silicon, so. So I am, basically what I'm going to do is these little refractometers, the way it works is different liquids have different refractive index. So when light hits it, it bends the light at a different angle. So on this little glass panel, there's a scale of different gravities. And based on how much sugar is in the liquid, it will bend the light at a different point so that it will read a different point on that scale. So what this is going to do is it's going to give us a good kind of rough working number in terms of what gravity we're sitting at. So when I was saying before that it's sitting at about 23 litres, about 23 litres isn't useful to me right now. So what I'm going to do, and I will add a bit more time to the day, but I couldn't get a kettle plugged in this morning. But I'm going to put a little bit of water, cold water, over the grains. About 2 litres. And it will knock me back a little bit in terms of coming up to the boil, but what I want is a measured volume. Because once I have a measured volume, I can make my calculations. So I'm shooting for a gravity of 1046. Now, if I want to achieve that, I need to know how much sugar I've pulled out of the grains over the course of that mash. And calculating that is reasonably simple. I just need to find out what the gravity is, which is what the refractometer is going to help me with, and I need to know the volume. So inside the Braumeister, there are lines marked on the central tie rod, and one of those lines is 25 litres. If I can get the liquid up to that 25 litre mark, I have that data point. So then all I need is the gravity to then calculate how much liquid I need at the end of the boil in order to hit the gravity that I'm chasing. So what I've basically done is I've put in a little bit of water. I'm going to need to put in a bit more, I think. But it's a pretty simple equation to calculate your end volume based on your desired gravity. So it's as simple as your current volume, and it doesn't matter what scale you use. You can use litres, gallons, whatever. Your current volume multiplied by your current gravity as expressed by, if you're doing specific gravity, it's as expressed by the last two numbers. So like 1056 will be 56. Divided by your target gravity. And if you do that equation, the number you get will specify your target volume in the scale or in the measurements that you use to measure your current volume. So I've just hit the 25 litre mark, so I'm going to quickly pull this out. I don't want any more liquid in there. It's going to be messy. Lucky we got them up. So right now I'm at 25 litres, making a mess. I've never brewed a beer in my life without making a terrible mess. But yeah, I am at 25 litres. So I've got my first data point. As the Braumeister is heating up, until it hits a certain temperature, the pump keeps running. So I'm pretty confident that I've got a good mix of sugar and liquid in there. Like I'm not sort of taking a stratified bit of liquid off the top when all the sugar's sitting at the bottom. So I've wet this refractometer, and looking through there, I'm currently sitting at 1042. 1041, 1042, somewhere around there. So, pulling out my handy little calculator, I've had my phone set to airplane mode today. What am I doing? So my current volume is 25, and my current gravity is 1042. So 25 times 42 is 1050. And I want to divide that by my target volume of 46. Which means that I want to finish this boil with 22.8 litres. If I can achieve that, then I've hit exactly the volume that I'm chasing. So it's a really pretty simple bit of maths. You can get apps to do it. I had one for years that I used exclusively, but when my phone, like when I changed to my new phone, the app that I'd transferred from every phone I've had for the last 10 years didn't come across with it. So I had to figure out how to do it manually.
Yeah, that's...
And then when I found out how to do it manually, I'm like, this is actually really easy, and I wish I'd done done that earlier.
Yeah,
it's not a hard.
Yeah, it's something that I probably left too long. Just working out water calculations, and you know, it's well worth in your interest to just get your head around how they work, because they will save you a lot of pain and effort on brew day. I think that could be a good topic for a video.
Yeah,
funnily enough.
definitely.
There may be discussions about that happening at some point.
Yeah, so at this point, I'm sitting at 25 litres. I know that this Braumeister is going to boil off between 2 and 3 litres. So if my target volume is 22.8, I'm probably going to come pretty damn close to my target gravity. And as I said earlier, because this is homebrew, I'm not like in a commercial brewery where exact numbers and consistency is as important. That's good enough for me today. But if I found out that I was going to need to boil off quite a bit to hit my volume, if I had a bad mash, but that never happens because you should always use more grain than you need so that you can add more water and hit your numbers if that's important to you. So like, mash stronger and then dilute down to your target gravity.
Aim over target.
Yeah.
You could always dilute back, but it's harder or longer to boil off in order to achieve a high gravity.
Yeah. That's if you're really like if you're focused on chasing the numbers.
Yep.
But yeah, if it was going to be if the end gravity, if I wasn't worried as much about hitting the numbers, but the end, and if it was going to be quite different or quite a different volume, I would need to adjust the hops that I was adding. Because I'm chasing a set level of IBUs and I don't want to go too much over or under that, because then it's going to push me out of style.
That's a really good point. If your water calculations are out or you miss gravity, then it does affect things down the line if you have to adjust to catch up.
Yeah, and so if I'd had a really super powerful mash for some reason, and was way overshot the amount of sugar that I had in there, then I would need to have considerably higher volume at the end, which means I need to add a lot more water to it. And if I was only using the same amounts of hops, then I wouldn't have enough bitterness there or enough flavour to balance out the malt sweetness and all those other things, and that would throw the whole beer out of balance. So I would then need to readdress those calculations based on the end volume. So I could jump on, I don't know all the maths for that off the top of my head, but you could jump on an online calculator or whatever you use to build your recipe.
Brewing software.
And you can just change the volume in most of those recipe calculators to whatever your end volume is actually going to be. And then you can, from there, adjust the hops to hit those numbers that you were shooting for.
Little quick comment in the chat. JP hit 10:45.
Legend.
Yep.
So, so you might, it's up to you. You might decide that you wanted to come down a little bit. So like water it down, add a bit more water. It doesn't really matter. Literally, gravity is just a measure of how much water there is compared to sugar. So it's not going to impact the flavour of the beer if you did dilute it. The style guidelines puts the starting gravity anywhere from 1045 to 1051. So if you're 1045 now, depending on your boil off rate, you probably will still fall within that range. So it's up to you whether you want to dilute it or not.
Yeah, but that's good, Jared. Good job.
Yeah, it's a nice, efficient mash.
Yep. What system are you using, Jared, by the way? Just out of curiosity. Just type it in the comments.
One?
No, sorry, Jared, I'm talking to you.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just curious about what you're using. Jared,
I will say as well that this refractometer, I accidentally grabbed the crappy one. So I may be out on those numbers as well.
Mystery beer.
I did end up wiping it off. I mean, I can take another reading now and see if it's changed at all. These things are temperature dependent to a point. The good thing about refractometers is you only need a couple of drops to take a sample and take a reading. And the couple of drops comes to the right temperature a lot quicker than 100 mils. So if you're having to take off 100 mils at like near boiling temperatures and cool it down to take an accurate hydrometer reading, that's a lot of waiting around.
Yeah, that is the...
Okay, so now it's saying like 1050, so I don't really know. Like I said, this thing, I don't trust this refractometer.
Sure, and
it always leads me
dip your finger
astray
in the
when I
works,
use it,
Oscar.
which is why I sort of said, I'm not going to bother.
Yeah, when
with
in home brewing,
changing.
this is something that you're going to come across. You know, sometimes you just got to go with the flow and not be too concerned with the numbers. If you're in the way I personally go as well, is if I'm in the ballpark, I'm happy enough. But if you really want to chase those numbers, there are options available to you if you really want to. You know, it just takes a bit more effort.
I always get pretty much bang on the same efficiency when I use this system.
Yeah.
About sort of 75%.
Point two. Once you've dialed in your system and your process and your calculations, you do tend to be able to produce a fairly consistent result.
So I trust that my recipe is going to give me the beer that I'm chasing on this occasion. But if I was, like I said, if this was in a commercial setting and this was about 25 times bigger, like the ones we see, like that are behind us currently, then I would definitely make sure that I calibrated that tool to make sure I was getting an accurate reading, and I could make the adjustments necessary to do what I needed to do. I'm going to put the lid on this and let it pick up heat a little bit quicker, because I did just put a few litres of cold water in there, which will have knocked the temperature down a little.
So it's going to take a little longer to get up to boil?
It is. Well, it's saying it's 86 degrees. I don't know if that's accurate, but if it is, like, that's awesome. One thing I am mindful of, though, with putting the lid on is that I don't want it to erupt. So that is something that can happen when your sort of protein break happens, is it can form a skin, build up a heap of sort of latent energy underneath that skin, wanting to move out, and the second that skin breaks, it can all kind of explode up out and then out of your kettle, and that's not an ideal scenario. So I will be kind of mindful of not leaving the lid on for too long. Once it sort of starts to get into the 90s, I'll pull the lid off and keep an eye on it, and as the protein skin starts to form, I'll just break it up with my paddle. Yeah. All you need is to break the surface tension. It's why you'll often see in breweries they'll have like spray hoses or like spray bottles.
I was going to say a little spray bottle can be helpful.
So at home, if you've got like a little bottle just with water that you can spray over the top, that can be enough. If you've got a boil over, just spraying the top of it can knock it back down. And knowing that that's there means you're less likely to panic when if it does happen as well.
You will get a boil over at least once in your life.
Yeah, exactly once in my case. So far. I'm just going to quickly grab a mop and just clean up this. Yeah, absolutely. Gross. Okay.
I actually had a boil over just the other week.
I'm not going to grab a mop because they're both sitting in interesting coloured water. We'll just leave that there. I might grab some paper towels actually and wipe it up.
Yep, cool.
Got a little wild fermentation going on back behind the screen in the mop bucket.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Someone's obviously done a mop and then left it in the water. But that's okay, that happens. We've been so busy since this pandemic thing has kicked off.
Oh yeah, it has been interesting times for everyone.
Yeah, you're either kind of stuck at home in sort of lockdown, or in the cases where you've got sort of like mailroom and things like that going on, we've just
those of us who are lucky to be
so many orders that we're trying to process at the moment. So
mental.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, you clean that up. What else? What else is interesting?
I'm just going to put this in a bin. That's another thing. If there is anybody watching this who's relatively new to brewing, first of all, I apologize for maybe shooting a little high. We have sort of been tackling some kind of more advanced topics and ideas in this video, which I guess was kind of, we've got a fair few beginner level things kicking around, and definitely while you're on this YouTube channel as well, after this is done, we've got a video specifically about brew in a bag, which covers a lot of the basics of brewing. So if you have sort of been finding that we're kind of talking another language and going a bit extreme with it in this video, check that one out, and you'll get sort of a good grounding in the basics. But if there are any beginners, it's really important you clean as you go.
Yeah, little pro tip. If you clean as you go, it makes life a lot easier for you.
So I'm looking at this malt pipe down here and just thinking, when can I dump the grains and hose off the sugary liquid before it becomes solid? Because the second it becomes solid, you got a whole lot more work. Jeff was talking about this we touched on this when he was doing his kegging video, the kegging stream. So if anyone is interested in kegging as well, I recommend you check that out, is in our stream history. And yeah, we were just talking about the concept of cleaning sooner than later is better, because if you let that, once that crust forms and the stuff dries, it's just so much harder to shift. You hit a point where it's like, do I just buy a new one? Is it really? And honestly, sometimes that is the right answer. Like how many dollars worth of cleaning products and things are you going to throw at a mess?
Yeah.
Before it becomes like even just like economically cheaper to buy a new fermenter or to, you know.
Unrelated story. I lived in a share house once where, I don't know, I think it was spag bowl or something got left in a pot. Yeah. Anyone who's ever lived in a share house probably has had an experience like this.
That's a very similar story.
Well, I'm sure 1 week turned into 2. I think it was like 6 months until it just got chucked. It got put into the garden first, and it just grew. It just grew into something. So don't let that happen to your beer stuff, because it's expensive equipment to have to throw out.
Some of it can be, definitely. And also, I think with beer, you are dealing with such a microbially unstable process. Like you want cleanliness is the absolute #1 consideration.
Absolutely, brewing is cleaning. So
you don't want your fermenter to have manky shit going on in it. Even if you do a really good job of cleaning it, some of that manky stuff might still be floating around in there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't want to allow nasties to set in. Even if you can clean them, you may not be able to see them, but they could still be there. Quick question, if you've got the time for it. Elijah's asking, do we repurpose the spent grains? That's a good question here at the shop anyway.
Here at the shop we do.
We do.
We have a farmer, we did have a pig farmer, I think now we've got cows. And he comes in usually on a Saturday. He's probably been in today. So we do 3 brews a week now on the big 500 litre Braumeisters. We've got 2 of them. And our cow farmer comes in, grabs our big containers full of grain, drops off the empty ones, and takes it back to his farm, and the cows get a really tasty grainy treat. They all love it. And generally speaking, when you are at a restaurant that says grain fed, it's usually a brewery that supplied those grains, which is really cool. It's sort of something that's been going on for centuries, most likely, where, you know, like society tends to run in a fairly mutually beneficial way. You got the brewer producing all this grain, and you got the farmer producing the meat or the milk or whatever, and needs to feed them. And so why throw out all that grain when the brewer can just give it to the farmer and feed the animals, who then gives the meat back to the brewer, and then it's the cycle of kind of meaningful labour.
Quick, another note on that question too, just in general, when you're at home, composting grains can be a challenge because it's very wet. after you use it, and it may cause a little bit of stickiness in the compost bin. So yeah, you just got to, I think in my experience, I kind of lay it out first in an area of the garden that I'm lucky enough to have, and then I'll let it dry a bit, then put it in the compost bin. If you put it straight in, I think you just got to make sure you keep turning it. There's too much wet matter for it to be, I think, a really good composting.
I have 3 chickens.
Or get yourself some chickens. That's
but I have stopped giving them the grain recently because all the other birds in like a 10k radius all just hang out in our backyard now, expecting grains, and then they eat all the expensive chicken feed as well, and it's a bit of a nightmare. I don't mind that as much, but my dog hates birds, and she just barks and barks and barks and barks at these birds, and she's getting a bit on in years now. She's a bit senile, so she barks a lot anyway.
Yeah.
And then giving her another reason to bark is just not doing us any favors with the neighbors. So, but we've got like a sort of creek across the road from our place, which has like a bunch of water birds and sort of native wildlife and stuff. So I've taken to, I still give the chooks some of the grain, but a lot of it I'll sort of take down to the creek bed and sort of spread out along there, and I think a lot of the local sort of wildlife appreciates that.
I used to rent a property that had an avocado tree, an almond tree, and we thought, oh cool, almonds, we're going to be able to pick almonds. Anyway, come harvest time, the corellas would descend, and you just have a tree full of native wildlife, which at the end of the day, I just decided, okay, the almonds are for them now.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just nice to see the birds.
It is, yeah. I guess there's also like some people like make dog biscuits or like different things out of them. Bread, you can use it for
bread.
All sorts of things you can do. Boost your fibre content, make some brewsly maybe. So I guess the only real thing we've got left to talk about is the hops. So I think the really crucial thing for this style of beer is using the right hops. We were kind of touching on that and we got massively sidetracked. So Magnum, as I said, is a good option. If you're only going to do a 60-minute addition, which is, I'm checking on this like a fiend because I don't want it to launch. I might even just take the lid off at this point. I think the Braumeister does tell you to take the lid off once it hits a certain temperature, but I just don't want it to do the thing. And I'll leave that across there, so that will break up surface tension if it does try to erupt as well. What was I saying? So a lot of people say one single 60-minute addition of a good German hop will give you enough flavour for this style. Personally, I like a little bit more hop flavour in it. And when I say a little bit, I mean a tiny bit. Like, you don't want a super strong hop character from this beer. Or else you're getting into Pilsen territory. So I, for this recipe, have done one 20-gram addition of Hallertau at 6.6%. The amount of hops I'm adding is dependent on the alpha acids. So if your hops are 4% alpha acids, you might add more of them at that 60-minute addition in order to hit the bitterness level that I'm chasing. But currently they're 6.6%, so I'm putting 20 grams in at 60 minutes. And then at 10 minutes, I'm putting in 10 grams. So a really small amount, just to give it a slight kick of hop flavour. I think it's really sort of pleasant to, and it's Hallertau. I'm not putting in like Cascade or Citra or one of those big, punchy, citrusy, piney
continental
monsters.
hops are their own thing.
It's a little bit floral, a little bit spicy. I think Hallertau more spicy. When I use Tettnang, it's more floral. So they kind of have their places that they occupy.
Yeah.
And both are delicious in a Helles.
Yeah.
And I really base it on how good the hops are smelling. Like, that's one benefit of working in a homebrew shop, is when you open a new bag of hops, you stick your nose in there, this batch is really good.
Yeah, not to make anyone jealous, but yeah, we were talking before the stream about this very topic, Hallertau, and I was saying how I've come to enjoy Tettenang, and I got onto that from opening a bag recently and just thinking, oh, that smells pretty good. I think I have to make a beer with that.
Yep. And yeah, both are awesome. Both are from the Hallertau region, and both have an incredible flavour and aroma. So either is good. I do probably have a particularly strong fondness for Hallertau tradition or middle fruit. They are different hops, but they have really similar characteristics. Yep. It's got this slightly cinnamony kind of spiciness to it,
right.
which is really sort of, it's hard to describe. It's its own thing. It really is its own thing, but it's just gorgeous in a beer. And I want a little bit of that to come through in the glass. So I am doing a little 10-minute edition, but you could absolutely get away with doing just a 60-minute edition for a Helles.
Yep.
With one of those hops again. You want something from Bavaria, so Hallertau, Tettenang, Magnum, your Spalt and your Perla and your Northern Brewer probably wouldn't be hops that I would use in this style.
Okay, so they're a little too, needing something a bit more delicate, is that the idea?
Yeah, it's just the wrong character. Like, Northern Brewer's got a real mintiness to it, which I don't think really fits. And Spalt's got a real twang to it. Like, it's perfect in an alt beer.
So something a little more.
I feel like
meaty,
in this one, you want more of the floral or the spicy and slightly earthiness as well that you kind of get from these hops.
Yep, interesting.
And I honestly, I recommend everybody, as you're getting into brewing, try to use a bunch of different hops when you're getting started. So, like, find excuses to use a hop you haven't used before.
Good point.
Open the bag and get your nose into it and give a really good smell and write down what you're smelling. And then when you've got it in the beer, write down what you're tasting. Because your notes on what you smell and taste are going to make more of a connection in your brain to those smells and flavours than somebody else's descriptions. Yep.
It's like a mindful, you know, you're just sort of making those connections, and yeah, that's a good. Smash beers are really good for that.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. But yeah, when you've written it down, and this is pretty much technically a smash beer.
True, yeah.
If you don't count the acidulated malt.
Example.
And what I could do in place of using acidulated malt is I could put some lactic or phosphoric acid in the mash, just like through a syringe, to do my pH adjustments that way. I use the acidulated malt mostly because I like the fact that it's in line with the Reinheitsgebot. So when I'm brewing German beers, I like to kind of stick to that. Yep. I think it's also pretty easy when you're using a water calculator. I mean, it's easy either way, but you can just take out some of your base malt and replace it with acidulated malt, and it will give you, in real time, kind of the adjustment to your mash from doing that. So. But yeah, you could absolutely call this a smash beer. It's Pilsner and Hallertau. And I reckon if you nail a brew like this and enter that into a smash beer comp, you will absolutely destroy the competition.
Yeah, and for those who maybe aren't familiar with the term, smash beer means single malt, single hop. Yeah, that's right. Single malt, single hop. So it's just, yeah, you're just trying to get a clean expression of two ingredients, just so you can.
And lager is probably the best way to get a clean expression of like we said earlier, like you get a really clean, clear expression of the ingredients you put into the beer. So yeah, smash lagers, great way to learn ingredients. Because I think as well, getting to know the ingredients in the context of a beer is important. So I heard someone say once what they'll do is get a type of beer like maybe like Tui's, what's the one, not Tui's, Carlton Cold.
Oh, okay.
Which is like, it's a really sort of low flavoured
Yeah.
kind of macro lager. And they'll pop the caps off, throw a couple of pallets of a different type of hop in there and just reseal them. And then they can come back to it. Yeah, then they can come back to it and smell it, taste it, and they're getting that hop in the context of a beer. So it gives them a more accurate idea of what is going to happen if they use that in a brew. And I've never actually tried it to do it, but it makes a lot of sense. And when you do like in BJCP or in the Cicerone training that they do, when you're doing doctored beer tastings, it usually is a beer like Carlton Cold or...
yeah, right, just a very, I mean, not to...
super low flavour beer.
Yeah.
So you'll have a glass of your control, which is just the beer with nothing added. And then they'll add the different additives in there. So you can see the difference between the beer with and the beer without. And yeah, it can be a fun thing to do.
A good tip for...
If you join a brew club,
yeah.
if there's one handy, quite often brew clubs will get those doctored beer tasting kits in as well, which are good fun and a really good way to learn about. I mentioned diacetyl before. How do you know what diacetyl is if you haven't tasted definite diacetyl in a beer? That's where those doctored beer kits, you literally have the chemical that you're putting in the beer. You can say, okay, this is what diacetyl is, this is what it tastes like. So then when you notice it in a beer that hasn't been doctored, you can recognize it and act accordingly.
So it looks like we're at the boil, is it? Or is it still coming up? We're close to it. I do find the Braumeisters do create it's a gentle rolling boil. It's a nice soft boil.
Which is good.
Yeah.
Gentle is what we want.
Yeah. It used to be the school, well, it probably is perhaps that yeah, it had to boil vigorously, you know, boil the snot out of your wort in order to create the DMS precursors that you were mentioning earlier. As with everything in brewing science, I think that's being challenged.
They did a study 4-ish years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, on the impact of thermal load on a beer, which basically came to the conclusion that the more thermal energy you pump into your wort through the brewing process, so I'm just adding hops as I go. The more thermal energy that you pump into the beer over the course of the brewing process, the less stable it becomes. So things like oxidation and various different kind of spoilage characteristics were more likely to eventuate. Still go. The more likely, that those things were likely to come up. So there is now the idea of people who have read and follow that study at least, that the bare minimum thermal energy you can push into your kettle to get the boil happening, you just want like a bit of movement, the better. And as long as you are getting a boil, as long as you're getting like movement and bubbles and things like that, you're golden, basically. It's still going to be driving off those DMS precursors. You're still getting all the benefits of the boil. You still are summarising all your alpha acids. You're still doing all the things you need to do. You're just you're not introducing those potential down the line stability issues.
And sorry, I was doing a bit of camera work there, so I didn't catch it all. I don't know if you mentioned as has come up earlier, the oxygen. I think there's some oxygen that can get created with a heavy boil. I don't know if that's correct or not, but
not too sure.
The Lodo process, I understand, calls for a very gentle boil. So I assume that has something to do with that. If any of you have any experience with the Lodo process and want to chime in yet, as they say on the YouTubes, comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I think that's pretty much Munich Helles covered, really. Like,
Cool.
If there were any questions from the chat, people that want to talk about things, basically what's going to happen now is this will boil for about an hour.
Yeah.
10 minutes to go. The machine was going to beep at me. I'll throw in the rest of the hops. I've got some yeast nutrient and some brew bright there, which is going to help fine out and clear any of the protein that does kick up in the beer. It'll help clear that out. But I didn't mention it at the time, but I didn't really get a hop break with this beer. And that's that protein rest has broken down
interesting.
a lot of those proteins and helped them kind of and also
Let me just,
I don't know.
All right, we're back. Sorry, everyone. We're just the camera just cut out. So
I don't know if the science actually backs me up in what I'm about to say. So if not, just laugh at me, because I'm not a scientist. I'm a musician. But I personally find that doing the protein rest gives a fuller mouthfeel in the end beer.
Actually, I see what happened. I'm just going to stop you there. Yep. Sorry, everyone. The battery on the camera is almost ready to run out, so we're just going to do a super quick break, and then we'll pick up that thought. Cool. I just got to switch the battery out. Won't be long. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Oh, that was a... We're back.
Hey!
That was a thing. That was definitely a thing. Thanks for bearing with us.
We have things on occasion.
Camera's working again. All right, so I can't remember what we were talking about. Boil. We had a couple of questions. Gareth. Oh, sorry, Garth. I got your name wrong. The no boil Berliner Weisse enters the chat. Very good. Elijah's asking about whether there are any good brew clubs in the local area. I guess that depends on your local area, but the answer is yes.
Yeah, there should be. Yeah, it depends where you are, but if you're in a city, there definitely will be.
I'll put a link to Vic Brewers, maybe, is it? The Vic Brew website, and you can have a look there. Mary Mashers is a good club for the northern suburbs. Westgate Brewers for out west here. Melbourne Brewers.
Yeah, Melbourne Brewers, Bayside.
All of them are good, I mean.
I think there's a brew club out Mount Macedon way now as well, or like in that general area. because they actually had a showing at the last ANHC conference, and some of their beers were phenomenal. So if you're out out that way, I think there's a Geelong one now as well. One of our sort of long-term regular customers is involved with them. Shout outs if you're watching. You know who you are. Hooked me up with some awesome insulation foam for my urn after they had a heap left over from one of their projects.
Yeah, again, another benefit to joining a brew club is the contacts and just the perks. There's lots of perks, you know. Yeah. Everyone helps each other out.
But particularly in Victoria, there's a ton. Yeah. And I know in other states, at least in the cities, there will be one or more brew clubs.
Hobson's Bay. So it's not familiar with the area, but
yeah, I'm not too sure.
Well, I'll have a look, Elijah. I'll post something. Let's see if I can find something. Yeah, Gash is lamenting the lack of a club down in Werribee. And Garth is asking what our feelings are on the no boil Berliner. Just pasteurised.
I've never made one, but I've heard good things.
Yep.
You have?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah,
I
awesome.
would do that as just a matter of practice. No boil Berliners, pasteurise. Yes, bring it up to pasteurising temperature. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like doing a decoction, right? Like if you're into Berliners, you kind of have to have a crack.
Yeah, exactly. There's no real
just trying to be
technical reason for it. I just did it because that's sort of lends the style. And yeah, it was just for the fun of it. So I recommend do it. Do it if you're interested.
Customer just dropped a beer off for us before, so it is tasty. Tastes a little IPA. A bit of crystal malt in there actually, which is interesting.
So
sometimes that can be a good thing.
Yeah, that's liberating, lifting the mask up.
Feel the air flooding into the lungs, and then replacing it with beer.
Almost. Not the lungs, hopefully, but. Yeah.
Oh no, not yet. That's for later.
Oh, that's all right. That's pretty good. It smells good.
Yeah, really good hop character. Oh, it is boiling and boiling and boiling. It's a bit weird drinking such a powerfully hoppy beer when we're making a Munich Helles, but
yeah, and people probably watching this. Oh no, it's in the afternoon. It's beer. Yeah, there you go. You can see. Yeah, that's a pretty good job.
Yeah, cheers.
I'd drink that. Definitely.
And yeah, there's really not much else to do with the beer. Were there some other questions?
Okay, let's see. Reading through. Another question from Garth. I think off topic, but hey, well, we've got time.
Yeah.
He's asked about fruit.
Ooh.
Fruit in beer, bagged or loose?
Depends on the fruit, I guess.
Yeah.
I was pulling chunks of strawberries and seeds and things out of my beer line for quite a while after I had my raspberry and strawberry Berliner Weisse on it. To the point where I just changed the lines out, and now I believe I will bag those fruits in the future.
I think bag. I'm just trying to remember. I haven't done fruit in the fermenter for a while. I made a cherry mead once, and it was in a demijohn. I can't remember what happened, but I think I put them in loose. It was a nightmare.
I did rack that beer off with a siphon to keep most of the fruit behind in the fermenter, but even with that, I still got little chunks through.
Yep. Which is going to happen, with fruit beers. You're going to get a bit of pulp. What's the word I'm thinking of? Pectic enzyme is a good idea to add, just if you care about clarity.
But yeah, I think
blended raspberries.
Whenever the question is bag or no bag, whether it's hops or fruit or anything, the trade-off is always not getting chunks of physical material in your beer versus getting the most utilization out of what you're putting in there. So you will lose a bit of the impact per kilo of whatever you're putting in, but at the benefit of not picking out chunks of strawberry from your
bottles or whatever,
from your stout like 2 months down the track.
It is, yeah.
West Coast style.
That is really good.
Like real piney and resinous.
Yeah, that note we were just complimenting.
Yeah, if the customer who dropped this beer off is watching, thank you. It's really tasty.
More, please. Yeah, that's a cracker. Garth again. So it's blended raspberries. He doesn't want to attempt to blocked pop it. Yeah, that's definitely what you. So yeah, bag it. I don't know if blending maybe is just pop them in whole. What are your thoughts on that?
I have always used frozen fruit, whether I froze it myself or bought it frozen. The benefit of frozen fruit is the freezing process and the thawing process breaks down the cell walls a little bit.
Yep.
So you get a bit more extraction.
Yep. So that's a tip, is if you're not using, frozen fruit is fine, by the way. There's maybe a stigma against using frozen fruit because it's not as fresh. But it's perfectly fine to use and cheap and readily available.
It definitely won't be fresh by the time it's been fermented, right?
Yeah. And so if it's not fresh, chuck it in the freezer. There is a school of thought that says that, well, it does. It breaks, once it thaws, it breaks down more easily in the fermenter. It just sort of turns to mush. And it just allows those flavours and juices to be extracted. So you may not need to blend.
It also potentially will help. Sorry, I should put my mask back up now that I'm not using my mouth. It will also potentially, it's not going to completely sanitize the fruit, but it will slow down and inhibit kind of bacteria and wild things that are on there to give the yeast that you're using a chance to kind of take control. So that is also an argument in favour of freezing as well. But don't rely on that for your hygiene. But a lot of brewing, as much as we like to think we've perfectly sanitised our containers and things, a lot of it is just knocking the rivals to your yeast back enough so that your yeast gets the upper hand and out multiplies and out ferments everything else that's in there.
Yeah, and again, just shouting out to Jeff, who mentioned during the kegging demo, he's a very science guy. He's very science. is that a technical
science
term? He's so science. He mentioned that your beers are, at some level, are always going to get infected. Like something's always going to get in there. It's just a matter of time before it expresses, or being outcompeted by the organisms that you want in the beer. So that's just how it is. And I can't remember my point there. I had a point, but just just seconding what you were saying.
Totally, 100%. It really is. It's about less about killing everything else and more about kind of you're sort of getting in there and fending them off and pushing them back and making, like, kind of waving the yeast in to do, because you want the yeast to be the main thing that's chewing up the food that you prepared for it.
And for, again, anyone out there who is new to brewing and hears the word infection, it can be a bit of a scary, we're not talking about pathogens that are harmful to people. These are just...
usually.
Usually.
Very rarely.
Brewing's a very safe sort of food. It's not like other food products where you have to be worried about really
it's not like those other products you might have heard
about. Beer is a far superior product to those other ones you may have heard of. But mostly when we talk about infections, it's organisms and bacteria that just spoil the beer, make it taste bad.
Or make it taste different to how you want it to taste.
Sometimes they can be happy accidents. But, Jumbo Bug Sponge is just, just made a joke. Is it wrong to be drinking an IPA? Well, brewing a Helles and talking about Berliner Weisse. No.
It's all connected, fraud. Man.
Yeah, it's all connected, man. We're still counting down the boil there. I see, what is it? 16
We're about 17 minutes out of 60.
Getting towards the end. Okay, cool. So another 15 to 20 minutes to go for anyone who's doing a time check. But
we're 16 minutes in.
Oh. Yeah. Okay. 45
we're about 35.
Okay, as it were. We'll assess as we go. But hopefully everyone out there is having fun. I mean, today is obviously just a free-form, long format stream. We're just, you know, you can tune in, tune out as you go, comment in the chat.
We probably won't carry on all the way to the end of the boil.
Yeah, we might
not
cut
really
short
too much.
at some point.
And, you know, I'm sure Joel has a lot of equipment that you can't see because it's the thing that's making you see the things that you can see. That he probably is keen to get packed up at some point today as well. So
yeah, we're all good.
Kind of see how we go. Play
it's been fun. It's all good at the moment. Right. Speaking of equipment, I was going to check the camera. So anyway, talk amongst yourselves.
Talk amongst ourselves. But yeah, I mean, I think I can't think of anything else to say about Munich Helles at this point. We've really kind of done a deep dive
we've
today.
Definitely covered the topic of Munich Helles, so.
Which is what we set out to do, so I'm happy with that.
Yeah, that's good. We achieved that objective.
There are certain beer styles that I could do a 3 to 4 hour stream of constant talking about.
Yeah.
Munich Helles is one of them.
Yeah.
So we've achieved that today.
We should do, this again in the future. But yeah, not all our streams will be this long. We've got plans to do shorter, more focused topics. Streams, like I said, will be divided up into smaller chunks, so we'll be uploading them in high quality. So yeah, there'll be lots of content out there to come.
High quality, so we'll have to edit all the me bits out of it then. But yeah, no, it's looking and smelling delicious. It's a little bit murky now that we've thrown a whole bunch of hops into it, but yeah.
Cool. Well, the chat's gone quiet again.
Well, maybe we should call that a stream.
Should we call this a stream? What do you think? Yeah.
Like I said before, you guys have seen us throw beer into cubes countless times before. We've got videos on it.
Yep.
And yeah, there's not much else that's going to happen from this point on.
Yeah, so pretty much from here it's just a boil. Ben talked earlier about the late hop additions that he's got over there. There's a bit of findings to chuck in, but again, we'll probably cover, if we haven't covered this in videos already, there'll be more coming out. We'll just sort of focus on the steps. Yeah, and then there's cubing, and as we said, there's a cubing video out there. I will pop a link, hang on that side, up there. There'll be a link eventually to that. For anyone who's interested, yeah, cool. Yeah.
Otherwise, thanks for hanging out. I've had fun today.
Yeah, I had fun. Thanks for all the chat and the comments. You've all been really good today.
I think the more active the chat is, the kind of, I really appreciate this format because you get that kind of opportunity to have a conversation. It's not just like blasting you with prepared information.
And it is, you know, in these weird times where we're all self-isolating, and we would love to be able to do the live demos with the crowd. Obviously that's not possible at the moment, so this is a really good format, you know, to get feedback and engagement with our community. We're getting lots of comments. Obviously a lot of people watching in Werribee, they're hanging for a club.
Oh, well, there you go,
do it, guys.
You've exposed yourselves as a group of people that want to do a thing. So the next step is just organising together out of that. So I don't know how YouTube works, whether you can message users individually, or maybe if you jump into one of the comments and drop some details to get in touch or whatever, and
ideas.
Get organised, get together, make a Werribee Brew Club.
Yeah. Werribee.
Maybe you can meet at Hopheads or something in Point Cook. Once the pandemic's over. Once
we're the dust is settled eventually.
So in a few years. In
a few years, just a couple of years. But honestly, everyone, thank you so much, guys and girls, for your support and watching. We do hope that these streams will prove a success in the future, and that we can continue to grow an audience and get a collaborative community of friendly folks.
Even
spread the word of good beer, and that's all we're trying to do is help people make better beer.
If you guys have something you'd like to see us do a stream about as well,
suggestions,
drop a comment, shoot us an email, let us know, and we can kind of work on that too. So.
Yeah, And awesome work, JP. He's looking forward to trying his beer in a few months when it's ready.
Yeah.
You know, just a couple of months. Lagers are good like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one good thing about lower gravity ones like Helles is you don't have to lager them for quite as long for them to be good. And Helles actually is a lager that is better fresh. So you obviously still want to lager it. I'd sort of say as a general rule with lagers, give it a month cold, and every 10 points over 1040 it goes, add a week to that. So 1050, I'd maybe 5 weeks, 1060, 6 weeks, 1070, 7 weeks. And the good thing about that is the number corresponds with the gravity as well.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's sort of my general rule for lagering times, I tend to find that works well for me. But yeah, definitely Munich Helles. Once that 4 weeks is up, or once it's kind of at its point, drink it fresh, and you'll get that nice, gentle sort of hop flavour from that slightly later hop addition. You'll get the clarity of all the flavors. You'll like all the things that you sort of want out of it will be there. Over time, it will sort of become a bit muted.
Yep.
So
good point. Because I have often wondered about that myself. The extended lagering with beers that have that delicate hop flavour, you're trading off the lagering process with potentially the cost of those hop flavors.
I mean, it's exactly the same with pilsners. Even possibly more so with pilsners. I always thought Pilsner was a boring, bland, crappy style until I had Budweiser Budvar from a can instead of a bottle. So we had a can and a bottle next to each other. The can was a later packaging date than the bottle, but we opened the bottle, had a taste. Yep, that's how I understand Pilsners to be. Opened the can, and without even pouring it into the glass, got hit with a wave of floral SARS and was just like, what? and I brewed my first Pilsner that weekend, and it really does make a difference with those European lagers, the pale ones, the more kind of delicate ones. Having them a little bit fresher gives you
good, interesting advice. Yeah. So our pleasure, everyone. I hope there was information in there you found useful and entertaining. Just a bit of business, do all the subscribing stuff, that helps our channel grow.
Make sure you hit that bell notification.
Smash that subscribe button. Do it, don't do it, but yeah, it helps us out. But it's been fun. Thank you very much, everyone, and stay safe. Stay safe and be well. Okay, bye-bye.